I want the house. I want 100% of the company equity. And I want primary physical custody of Leo and Mia starting the last day of this month. Brad screamed across the conference table, his face flushed with rage and triumph. My lawyer slammed his hands on the wood, shouting at me to fight back, warning me that signing would destroy my life. But I did not argue. I did not cry. I simply picked up the silver pen and calmly signed away my entire life. Brad celebrated for 2 weeks, parading his new freedom and his new girlfriend around our neighborhood. I laughed because in his arrogance my husband forgot what I do for a living. My name is Naomi, 34 years old, and I am about to share how I turned my ex-husband's greatest victory into a federal prison sentence. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever let a narcissist dig their own grave. The air inside the glass-walled conference room at Boston's most expensive family law firm felt suffocating. Brad sat across from me. At 36 years old, he was riding the massive wave of his booming supply chain market. He adjusted the cuffs of his custom-tailored suit, staring at me with a smirk that practically dared me to shed a tear. Beside him sat his bulldog of an attorney. My attorney, David, was turning a shade of angry red. "Absolutely not," David fired back. "Naomi is entitled to half the marital estate. That includes Preston Logistics, the Beacon Hill property, and 50-50 joint custody. We are not signing a suicide pact today." "You will sign exactly what I tell you to sign," Brad snapped. "If you fight me, I will drag you through family court for 5 years. I will bleed your savings account dry. You will live in a studio apartment eating ramen noodles by the time I am done." I sat perfectly still. My hands were folded neatly in my lap. I did not look at David, who was shuffling through his notes in a panic, and I did not glare at Brad. I just looked at the divorce decree resting between us. "Naomi, do not let him intimidate you," David urged, his voice tight. "You co-signed the original loan that got his company off the ground 7 years ago. He is bluffing." "I do not bluff," Brad sneered. "You have spent the last 6 months acting like a calculating machine. You really think your little corporate salary can compete with my logistics empire? I am bringing in millions. You just count beans for a living. Sign the papers right now, Naomi. Walk away with the severance check or I will crush you." My tears dried up long before he asked for the divorce. They evaporated when I saw social media posts of Amber, his 24-year-old intern, wearing the diamond tennis bracelet he claimed was lost in the mail. Brad believed he was untouchable. He believed I was just his boring wife who stared at spreadsheets all day. "Page 4. Section 3, I said, reaching for the silver pen. "It states that you assume 100% ownership of Preston Logistics, including all assets, subsidiaries, and most importantly, all liabilities, past, present, and future. Is that correct?" Brad's lawyer cleared his throat. "That is correct. My client assumes full ownership and sole liability. You forfeit all rights to future profits, but you are also indemnified from any corporate debt moving forward." "Naomi." "Stop," David warned, grabbing my wrist. "Do not sign this document. He is taking the house and demanding primary custody. This is a blatant extortion." I pulled my wrist out of David's grasp and looked Brad in the eye. He expected a massive fight. He wanted me to scream to beg him to stay for our children. Instead, I uncapped the pen and flipped to the back of the stack. "Noted, David," I said calmly. I pressed the pen to the paper. I signed the property forfeiture. I signed the equity release. I signed the custody addendum taking effect when the kids returned from summer camp. Brad watched me, his jaw hanging slack. When I slid the executed documents across the table, he let out a barking laugh. "Wow," Brad said. "I knew you were weak, Naomi, but I did not think you would roll over this fast. You really are a coward." "I prefer the term efficient," I replied. "You wanted everything, Brad. Now you have it. The house, the company, the liabilities. It is all yours." I picked up my briefcase. David stared at me like I had lost my mind. Brad's lawyer organized the paperwork. "Make sure you are out by noon tomorrow," Brad called out. "Amber is moving in and does not want your clutter." I paused with my hand on the glass door handle. Enjoy the house, Brad, and make sure you get some sleep tonight. You are going to need it. I walked out, my heels clicking against the marble floors. My pulse was steady. For the first time in 12 years, I did not feel the weight of Brad's ego pressing down on me. I stepped into the elevator. I had 24 hours to pack my life into boxes. I was not worried about where I was going to sleep. I was focused on the encrypted flash drive sitting at the bottom of my briefcase. Brad thought I was a coward who counted beans. He had forgotten I was a senior forensic accountant. For 3 months while he slept with his intern, I had been deep inside his company servers. He wanted 100% of his business. I gave it to him. Every fraudulent tax-evading money laundering inch of it. The elevator doors closed, and for the first time in a year, I smiled. The parking garage beneath the family law firm was cool and echoed with the sharp sound of my sensible heels. I unlocked my reliable sedan, a stark contrast to the cherry red sports car Brad had purchased last month using company funds. I tossed my briefcase onto the passenger seat, treating the encrypted flash drive hidden inside like the loaded weapon it truly was. I started the engine, connected my phone to the Bluetooth system, and dialed my sister. Jasmine answered on the first ring, her voice tight with anxiety. "Tell me you did not sign that financial suicide note, Naomi," she said quickly. Jasmine was a fiercely protective younger sister, and her husband Jamal, a brilliant African-American prosecutor working as an assistant United States attorney, had already warned me about the extreme dangers of Brad's legal demands. "Please tell me David talked some sense into you, and you walked out of that room." "I signed it," I said, pulling out of the dark garage and merging into the bright afternoon traffic of downtown Boston. Every single page. I gave him the house. I gave him the logistics firm. I even signed the custody addendum. Jasmine gasped audibly over the car speakers. "Are you out of your mind?" "Jamal reviewed that draft last night. He said Brad was practically stripping you of your basic human rights. He gets primary custody at the end of the month. He keeps all the equity. Naomi, you built that company with him. You co-signed the original loans that got him off the ground." "I know exactly what I signed, Jasmine," I said, smoothly, stopping at a red traffic light. "Brad thinks he just pulled off the heist of the century. He sat in that conference room and told me I was a coward. He told his lawyer I just count beans for a living. He genuinely believes my job consists of tallying up office supplies and filing tax returns for middle managers. Because he is an arrogant narcissist who never paid attention to you or your career," Jasmine fired back angrily. "Exactly," I replied. "He completely forgot what a senior forensic accountant actually does. I do not just count beans, Jasmine. I track them. I follow them across international borders. I trace them through dummy corporations, offshore tax havens, and phantom payrolls. I have spent my entire career dismantling the hidden finances of corrupt executives. Brad is an absolute amateur compared to the seasoned white-collar criminals I put away for a living." I turned onto the highway, keeping my speed steady. The truth was that Brad had grown exceptionally sloppy. His affair with his 24-year-old intern Amber was just the tip of a very dirty iceberg. When I first suspected he was cheating, I did what any forensic investigator would do. I followed the money. I expected to find expensive hotel receipts and hidden jewelry purchases. Instead, I uncovered a sprawling criminal enterprise operating right under my nose. "How bad is the financial situation?" Jasmine asked, her tone shifting from panic to a hushed conspiratorial whisper. She knew my skills perfectly well. She knew I never made a move without a bulletproof strategy in place. "It is a catastrophic disaster," I explained, gripping the steering wheel. "Preston Logistics is not a booming supply chain company. It is a massive fraud machine. For the past 2 years, Brad has been billing clients for phantom shipments. He created fake vendor accounts to siphon money out of the business and into private offshore accounts. He has been dodging federal taxes, inflating his revenue to secure massive bank loans, and committing wire fraud on a daily basis. And the best part is that he gave Amber a fake promotion to logistics manager so she could sign off on the fraudulent invoices. She left her digital fingerprints on every single fake transaction. She is not just his mistress. She is his unwitting accomplice. Jasmine let out a low whistle of disbelief. So he is not just a cheater. He is a major federal criminal. A very careless federal criminal, I corrected her. He used the main company servers to route the illegal payments. He actually thought a basic password would keep his shadow ledgers safe from me. It took me less than a week to bypass his security and download the entire history of his operation. I have 500 pages of irrefutable evidence sitting on a flash drive in my briefcase right now. Every fake invoice, every illegal wire transfer, every offshore routing number is documented. It is a masterpiece of corporate suicide. Wait, Jasmine said, her voice dropping as the brilliant realization finally hit her. If you were still married to him and claimed 50% of the company in the divorce settlement, I would be liable for 50% of the federal debt I finished for her. I would be dragged directly into the FBI investigation. My professional license would be suspended immediately. They could have seized my personal savings and frozen my accounts. Brad wanted to leave me with nothing but by demanding 100% of the company equity and forcing me to sign an indemnification clause. He just legally shielded me from his entire criminal operation. I walked away completely clean. He took sole ownership of a sinking ship. Jasmine started laughing loudly. It was a rich, deep laugh that echoed perfectly through the car speakers. You let him bully you into signing a legal document that makes him solely responsible for massive federal tax evasion. He practically begged for it, I said, turning onto the scenic route that led toward my neighborhood. He was so eager to lock me out of his wealth that he locked himself into a federal indictment. And because the custody agreement does not take effect until the end of the month, the kids remain perfectly safe with me while his world burns down to the ground. By the time the dust finally settles, a family court judge will laugh at the idea of giving primary custody to a convicted felon facing decades behind bars. Jamal is going to lose his mind when he hears this brilliant setup, Jasmine said. He was pacing the floor this morning, ready to march into that law firm and represent you himself. Should I tell him the truth? Tell him to keep his work phone on, I advised. I sent an anonymous, heavily encrypted package to the IRS and the FBI regional office 10 days ago. Jamal might be seeing Preston Logistics cross his desk at the United States Attorney Office very soon. Where are you going right now? She asked. I have to go back to the house to pack my things, I said, turning onto the familiar tree-lined street of my soon-to-be former neighborhood. Brad gave me 24 hours to vacate the property. He wants to move Amber in immediately. I plan to be out by tonight. I do not want to be anywhere near that estate when the federal agents finally decide to pay him a visit. Do you need me and Jamal to come help you pack your boxes? Jasmine offered kindly. No, I packed all the important things while he was out celebrating his divorce demands last weekend, I said. I just need to grab my clothes and the kids' remaining belongings. I will head over to your place as soon as I'm completely done. I pulled up to the large iron gates of the $2.5 million property. The sprawling brick estate looked exactly as it had when I left this morning, but it no longer felt like home. It felt like a crime scene waiting to happen. As the heavy gates slowly swung open, I noticed a silver Mercedes parked arrogantly in the driveway. It was the exact model Brad had purchased last month. I have to go, Jasmine, I said, putting the car in park. It looks like the welcoming committee is already here waiting for me. Be careful, Naomi, she warned. Brad is a cornered animal, even if he does not know it yet. I am not worried about Brad right now, I replied, turning off the engine. I am only worried about keeping a straight face. I ended the call and stepped out of the car. The crisp afternoon air hit my face, but I barely felt it. I was hyper-focused on the task ahead. I grabbed my briefcase, ensuring the flash drive was safely tucked inside, and walked toward the heavy oak front door. My husband thought he had stripped me of my dignity, my home, and my children. He thought he had outsmarted a woman who spent her life unraveling the lies of arrogant men. As I turned my key in the lock, I prepared myself for the next phase of his delusion. I was ready to pack my bags, smile politely, and watch the illusion of his perfect life prepare for its spectacular collapse. The heavy oak door swung open with a soft click, revealing the grand foyer of the Beacon Hill estate. I stepped onto the imported Italian marble expecting the house to be empty. Instead, I found Gladys and Trent waiting for me like a pair of vultures perched in my living room. Brad had wasted no time sending in his loyal enforcers to oversee my eviction. Gladys sat rigidly on the custom velvet sofa, sipping sparkling water from one of my crystal glasses. My mother-in-law wore a smug expression that perfectly mirrored her son. Trent, Brad's younger brother, leaned against the marble fireplace mantel, scrolling through his phone with an air of unearned arrogance. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," Gladys said, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "Brad called us right after the meeting at the law firm. He said you practically surrendered the entire house without a single fight. I always knew you never truly belonged in a place like this, Naomi. You just did not have the pedigree to maintain a lifestyle of this caliber." I ignored her bait, walking past the living room and heading straight for the sweeping mahogany staircase. "I have 24 hours to vacate the property, Gladys. I suggest you enjoy the velvet sofa while you still can. I am just here to collect my personal belongings and my children's summer clothes." Trent pushed himself off the fireplace mantel and stepped into my path, crossing his arms over his chest. "Not so fast, Naomi," he sneered. "Brad specifically asked us to come over here and monitor your packing. He wants to make sure you do not try to sneak out any expensive items that were purchased with his company money. We know how people like you act when the gravy train finally stops running." "People like me," I repeated, maintaining a perfectly level tone. "You mean employed professionals who actually pay their own bills instead of leeching off their siblings' fraudulent corporate accounts?" Trent's face flushed a deep, angry red. "You are just bitter because my brother upgraded to a younger, prettier model who actually appreciates his massive success. Amber is moving in tomorrow, and she is already planning to redecorate that drab master bedroom you designed. Brad is finally going to have a wife who matches his elite status." I smiled warmly at Trent, stepping around him to ascend the stairs. "I highly encourage Amber to redecorate. She should definitely invest heavily in the property before the end of the month." I headed straight to the master suite, leaving them scrambling to follow me. I had already packed my essential items last week, leaving only my daily clothes, some personal jewelry, and a few specific financial records I wanted to keep completely out of federal custody. I pulled my 2 remaining suitcases from the closet and began transferring my tailored suits and silk blouses from the hangers. Gladys stood in the doorway of the bedroom, her eyes darting around the massive walk-in closet. She pointed a manicured finger at a collection of luxury handbags resting on the top shelf. "Leave those right there, Naomi. Brad bought you those designer bags with his hard-earned logistics money. They stay with the house. Amber might want to use them." I paused, holding a navy blue blazer, and turned to face my mother-in-law. I looked down at the pale pink quilted Chanel bag resting proudly on her left arm. It was a beautiful classic piece that cost upwards of $7,000. "Gladys, do you remember my 31st birthday? The year Brad's logistics company was facing massive cash flow problems because his early shipping contracts fell through." Gladys narrowed her eyes, clutching the pink bag tighter against her side. "What does that have to do with anything? My son is a millionaire. He fixed those temporary setbacks immediately. He fixed them because I bailed him out." I corrected her, my voice sharp and precise. "He fixed them because my immaculate credit score allowed us to take out a secondary mortgage on our starter home. And during that same exact month, you threw a massive tantrum because your country club friends were buying new designer accessories. You begged Brad for that pink Chanel bag to save face. He could not afford it, so I put it on my personal American Express card. In fact, I am still paying off the final installment of that specific transaction. So unless you want me to report that bag as stolen property right now, I suggest you lower your voice and step out of my closet." Gladys gasped, her mouth falling open in sheer indignation, but she instinctively took a step back into the hallway. Trent scoffed, leaning against the doorframe. "You are making things up because you are desperate. Brad is a titan in the supply chain industry. He never needed your mediocre corporate salary. You were just riding his coattails." I zipped up my first suitcase and turned my attention directly to Trent. Since we are discussing riding coattails, Trent let us talk about your sleek new BMW parked outside. Brad told you he leased it through the company as a business expense for your consulting role, right? Trent puffed out his chest. I am a vital logistics consultant for Preston Operations. I earned that corporate vehicle. You do not even know what a supply chain algorithm looks like, Trent. I laughed softly. Brad could not lease that car under the company name because his corporate debt-to-income ratio was already flagged by the primary lenders. He forged my signature as a guarantor on the dealership lease agreement 7 months ago. I discovered the fraudulent paperwork in his home office desk last week. I legally removed myself as the guarantor yesterday morning. The dealership will be repossessing your vital corporate vehicle by Friday due to lack of a qualified co-signer. You might want to ask your millionaire brother to buy you a bus pass. Trent stared at me, the arrogant smirk completely wiped from his face. You are bluffing, he stammered, his eyes darting toward Gladys for support. Brad would never do that. Brad has unlimited capital. You will find out soon enough, I said, grabbing the handles of both suitcases. I rolled them out of the closet, forcing Trent to step aside. I walked past the two of them, making my way down the sweeping staircase for the last time. My heart beat with a steady, triumphant rhythm. They were so blinded by Brad's flashy displays of wealth that they had no idea the entire foundation of their luxurious existence was built on quicksand and federal crimes. Gladys hurried down the stairs after me, her heels clicking loudly on the wood. You are walking away with nothing, Naomi. Brad won. He gets the house, the kids, the company, and the wealth. You are going to end up exactly where you started, a poor working-class nobody who tried to play in the big leagues. I reached the front foyer, opened the heavy oak door, and turned to look at my mother-in-law and brother-in-law one final time. I took in the extravagant chandelier, the custom artwork, and the smug, ignorant faces of the people who had treated me like an unwanted servant for over a decade. They believed they were witnessing my ultimate defeat. They had no idea they were standing in the center of ground zero. I am walking away with my freedom. Gladys, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the grand entrance hall. And I am leaving you all with exactly what you deserve. Please give Amber my warmest regards when she moves in tomorrow. I am sure she will fit right into this family dynamic perfectly. I stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, the heavy door clicking shut behind me. I loaded my suitcases into the trunk of my reliable sedan, completely ignoring Trent as he rushed out to frantically check the paperwork in the glove compartment of his BMW. I slid into the driver's seat, took a deep cleansing breath, and put the car in drive. As I pulled away from the towering iron gates of the Beacon Hill estate, I dialed Jasmine's number again. I was ready to head to my secret base. I was ready to watch the dominoes fall. The drive from the opulent Beacon Hill estate to my sister's quiet suburban neighborhood in Newton felt like crossing between two completely different dimensions. The towering gates and manicured hedges gave way to tree-lined streets, basketball hoops and driveways, and the comforting reality of normal, hardworking people. I pulled my reliable sedan into the driveway of Jasmine and Jamal's 4-bedroom colonial house. It was not a mansion, but it was warm, secure, and currently the safest place on earth for me to orchestrate my next move. I killed the engine, grabbed my suitcases from the trunk, and carried my heavy leather briefcase up the front steps. Before I could even reach for the doorbell, the front door swung open. Jasmine pulled me into a fierce, bone-crushing hug. My sister was a force of nature, a pediatric nurse who handled chaos with the same clinical precision I applied to financial spreadsheets. She grabbed my largest suitcase and pulled me inside the brightly lit entryway. The smell of roasted garlic and rosemary filled the air, a sharp contrast to the sterile catered meals Brad always insisted upon having delivered. Jamal stepped out of his home office, rolling up the sleeves of his crisp white dress shirt. My brother-in-law was a towering, broad-shouldered African-American man with a brilliant legal mind. As an assistant United States attorney for the District of Massachusetts, Jamal spent his days prosecuting complex federal crimes, organized syndicates, and high-level corporate fraud. He had an intimidating presence in the courtroom, but at home he was the protective anchor of our family. You actually did it, Jamal said, his deep voice echoing slightly in the hallway. He shook his head, a mixture of disbelief and deep respect crossing his features. Jasmine told me you signed the papers, but I needed to see you walk through that door in one piece to actually believe it. I am in one piece, I assured him, setting my briefcase down on the large oak kitchen island. And more importantly, I am completely untethered. Jamal pulled out a bar stool and gestured for me to sit. Let me see the damage, Naomi. I need to read the exact language Brad's bulldog attorney used in that decree. I want to know exactly what kind of legal minefield you just sprinted through. I unlatched my briefcase and pulled out the thick stack of freshly executed divorce documents. I slid them across the smooth granite countertop. Jamal put on his raising glasses, his demeanor instantly shifting from a welcoming brother-in-law to a razor-sharp federal prosecutor. The kitchen grew silent, except for the sound of Jamal flipping through the heavy legal paper. Jasmine poured me a large glass of water and leaned against the counter, watching her husband's eyes scan the text. For several minutes, Jamal read in absolute silence. His brow furrowed deeply as he reviewed the asset division, the property forfeiture, and the custody addendum that would take effect at the end of the month when Leo and Mia returned from their summer camp in Maine. Then he reached page 4, section 3, the specific indemnification clause. Jamal stopped reading. He pushed his glasses down the bridge of his nose and looked up at me, his dark eyes wide with sheer astonishment. Naomi, he whispered, tapping his index finger directly on the signature line. Tell me Brad's lawyer drafted this specific paragraph. Tell me he was the one who demanded this exact phrasing. Brad instructed him to ensure I could never touch a single dime of his future logistics profits, I explained smoothly. He wanted to guarantee that if the company sold or went public, I would have zero claim to the equity. His lawyer drafted the clause to create a total financial firewall between us, forcing me to surrender all rights, titles, and interests. But to make that firewall legally binding and impenetrable, the lawyer also had to explicitly state that Brad assumed sole and exclusive responsibility for all corporate liabilities, debts, and legal encumbrances. Jamal let out a loud, booming laugh that startled the family dog sleeping in the corner. He took the legal trap you laid out and he enthusiastically locked himself inside it. Naomi, this is brilliant. By signing this specific indemnification clause, you just legally shielded yourself from every single piece of fallout coming his way. You essentially scrubbed your name off the sinking ship and handed him the sole captain's wheel. If the federal government audits Preston Logistics tomorrow, this document proves you have zero legal or financial authority over their current operations. I reached back into my briefcase and pulled out the encrypted flash drive. I set the small piece of metal on the granite island right next to the divorce decree. The federal government will not need to conduct a random audit, Jamal. I have already done the heavy lifting for them. Jamal stared at the flash drive, his prosecutor instincts immediately flaring to life. What exactly is on that drive, Naomi? 500 pages of irrefutable, deeply buried forensic evidence, I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. Bank routing numbers, phantom vendor invoices, offshore shell company registrations, and a meticulously detailed trail of wire fraud and tax evasion spanning the last 24 months. Brad thought a basic firewall would keep me out of the main servers. He forgot that I build enterprise-level security protocols for international auditing firms. I cracked his system in less than a week. I downloaded the entire history of his criminal enterprise. Jasmine covered her mouth, her eyes darting between me and the flash drive. He really is stealing millions from his own clients and the government. He is laundering it through shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands, I confirmed. And the most tragic part is that he gave Amber, his 24-year-old intern-turned-mistress, the title of logistics manager so she could digitally sign off on the fake invoices. She left her electronic signature on every single fraudulent transaction. She is going to take the fall right alongside him. Jamal ran a hand over his closely cropped hair, letting out a long breath. This is wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. We are talking about severe mandatory minimum sentences under federal sentencing guidelines. Brad is looking at a decade or more in federal prison. And because you signed this divorce decree today before any federal indictments or asset freezes have been officially issued, you are viewed as a civilian ex-wife who simply walked away from a bad marriage, not a co-conspirator trying to hastily dump assets. I took a long sip of my water, feeling the cool liquid soothe my dry throat. 10 days ago, I compiled a slightly sanitized, anonymous version of this evidence. I routed it through a secure, untraceable VPN and sent it directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service and the local field office of the FBI. I gave them the map, Jamal. Now we just have to wait for them to follow it. Jamal smiled a sharp, predatory grin that meant he knew the bad guys had already lost. Welcome to the secret base, Naomi. Let him celebrate his fake victory. We have a front row seat to his absolute destruction. I slept that night with a profound sense of peace. The guest bedroom in Jasmine and Jamal's house was modest compared to the sprawling master suite I had occupied for the last 5 years, but the mattress felt like a cloud of pure freedom. When I woke up the next morning, the sunlight was streaming through the sheer curtains, signaling the official start of my new life. I threw off the covers, grabbed a comfortable oversized sweater, and headed downstairs. Jasmine was already in the kitchen pouring freshly brewed coffee into a large ceramic mug. She slid the mug across the granite counter toward me, her face pulled into a tight frown. She was staring intently at her glowing smartphone screen. "You might want to brace yourself," Jasmine said, her voice laced with heavy disgust. "The internet is awake, and Brad is wasting absolutely zero time rubbing his so-called victory in your face. Or rather, his new intern is doing it for him." I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the warm caffeine wake up my senses. I pulled my own phone from my pocket. My lock screen was already cluttered with dozens of notifications. Text messages from mutual acquaintances, neighbors from Beacon Hill, and wives of Brad's business partners were flooding my inbox. The messages were entirely predictable. They were saturated with superficial pity and feigned shock. "I am so sorry, Naomi. How could Brad do this to you? Are you holding up okay? Please let me know if you need anything." I ignored every single one of them. I did not need their pity. I did not need their fake sympathies. I opened the social media application and navigated directly to Amber's public profile. Amber had clearly been busy since I walked out of that house yesterday afternoon. Her Instagram story was a rapid-fire sequence of absolute vanity. The first photo was a wide shot of the grand foyer featuring her expensive luggage piled near the mahogany staircase. The second photo showed her holding a crystal champagne flute standing on the outdoor terrace overlooking the meticulously landscaped gardens. But it was the third photo that had prompted the barrage of pity texts from my supposed friends. Amber had taken a mirror selfie inside my custom-designed walk-in closet. She was wearing one of Brad's oversized dress shirts, posing in front of the empty shelving units where my tailored suits used to hang. Her caption was typed in bold pink letters across the bottom of the screen. "New lady of the house. Out with the old, in with the new." Jasmine slammed her hand against the kitchen counter, rattling her own coffee mug. "That arrogant little girl is literally standing in your closet gloating about stealing your life. How are you just standing there smiling, Naomi? I want to drive over there right now and drag her out of that house by her hair." I tapped the screen of my phone, zooming in on the photograph. "I am smiling because she is doing my job for me," I explained smoothly. "Look closely at the background of that picture, Jasmine. She is not just taking a selfie in my closet. She is publicly documenting her physical occupation of a primary asset purchased with laundered corporate funds. She is establishing a clear, undeniable timeline of her involvement in Brad's extravagant lifestyle. Every photo she posts is another piece of digital evidence tying her directly to the proceeds of federal wire fraud. She thinks she is flexing on the internet. I see a co-conspirator actively building a prosecution exhibit." Jasmine blinked, the anger on her face slowly giving way to a sharp, appreciative grin. "You are terrifying when you drink your morning coffee, sis." I set my phone face down on the counter and activated the Do Not Disturb feature. The pity texts could wait forever. I had much more important work to do. I carried my coffee upstairs to the small desk Jamal had set up for me in the corner of the guest room. I opened my laptop, inserted the encrypted flash drive, and entered the complex sequence of alphanumeric passwords required to bypass the security wall I had built. The screen went black for a fraction of a second before illuminating with a massive, highly organized directory of financial files. This was the 500-page ledger. It was the beating heart of Brad's criminal logistics empire. While Brad and Amber spent their morning popping champagne and claiming their stolen throne, I spent my morning systematically dismantling their kingdom row by row, column by column. Forensic accounting is not just about finding missing money. It is about understanding the psychological narrative behind the theft. Brad was greedy, but he was also incredibly lazy. As I decrypted the master accounting files, the full scope of his operation laid itself bare on my monitor. He had established a network of 6 primary shell companies. They had generic, boring names like Apex Global Supply Solutions and Horizon Freight Partners. They were all registered to a single registered agent address in Delaware, a classic amateur move designed to obscure ownership. I opened the routing tables. Brad would invoice his legitimate clients for massive freight shipments. The clients would pay Preston Logistics. Then Brad would generate a secondary, completely fabricated invoice from one of his Delaware shell companies claiming they provided phantom subcontracting services. Preston Logistics would pay the shell company, effectively washing the revenue and moving it off the official books to avoid federal corporate taxes. From Delaware, the clean money was wired directly into a holding account in the Cayman Islands. But the most beautiful, devastating part of this entire ledger was the approval column. Federal prosecutors need to prove intent and active participation to secure a conviction for corporate fraud. Brad could have easily blamed a rogue accountant or a software glitch if he had been smart. But Brad wanted to play the role of the generous sugar daddy. He had given Amber the official corporate title of logistics manager so he could justify paying her a 6-figure salary out of the company payroll. With that title came access to the corporate billing software. I highlighted a block of 50 fraudulent transactions routed to Apex Global Supply Solutions over the past 4 months. In the digital signature column next to every single fake payment, there was a unique employee identification code. I cross-referenced the code with the human resources database I had also downloaded. The code belonged to Amber. She had digitally authorized the transfer of millions of dollars in stolen funds. Brad had handed her the digital pen and she had eagerly signed her own federal indictment over and over again. She was probably sitting in my former bathtub right now, uploading a picture of her bubble bath to social media, completely oblivious to the fact that her digital signature was permanently attached to a massive federal tax evasion scheme. I spent the next 6 hours categorizing the data. I created color-coded flowcharts, mapping the exact trajectory of every stolen dollar. I linked the fraudulent shell company invoices directly to the personal expenditures Brad had made. The luxury sports car Trent was currently driving, the extravagant dinners at high-end steakhouses, the diamond tennis bracelet Amber flaunted online. It was all paid for with dirty money. My phone remained silent on the desk, blocking out the noise of the outside world. I did not care about the gossip circulating through my old neighborhood. I did not care what lies Brad was telling our mutual friends to justify his sudden divorce. The only narrative that mattered now was the one written in the numbers. Numbers do not lie. Numbers do not care about your ego, your custom suits, or your young intern. By mid-afternoon, my eyes were burning from staring at the bright screen, but the puzzle was finally complete. I had organized the 500-page ledger into a perfectly structured, undeniable roadmap of federal crimes. The IRS and the FBI already had the anonymous tip I sent 10 days ago. They were currently verifying the preliminary data. But this decrypted ledger was the final nail in the coffin. When the time came, I would make sure this beautifully organized evidence landed exactly where it needed to go. Brad thought he had successfully discarded me like trash. He thought he had secured a future filled with endless wealth and zero accountability. As I saved the final flowchart and safely ejected the flash drive, I knew his celebration was operating on borrowed time. The hourglass had already been flipped. He just could not hear the sand running out. I slipped the flash drive into the hidden zippered compartment of my briefcase and closed the lid with a satisfying snap. After hours of staring at the glaring white light of my monitor, my eyes ached and my stomach let out a hollow rumble, reminding me that I had skipped breakfast entirely. Jasmine and Jamal were both at work, leaving the house completely silent. I decided to run a quick errand to clear my head. Jasmine had mentioned earlier that they were running low on fresh produce and coffee beans. Buying groceries was the least I could do to thank them for opening their home to me on such short notice. I grabbed my coat and my wallet, walking out into the crisp afternoon air. The local premium grocery store was only a 10-minute drive from their neighborhood. I navigated the aisles methodically, filling my cart with organic vegetables, premium cuts of steak for Jamal to grill later, and 3 bags of the expensive artisanal coffee beans Jasmine loved. It felt good to do something normal, something completely detached from corporate fraud and federal indictments. I approached the checkout lane, chatting politely with the cashier as she scanned the items. The total came to just over $200. I reached into my wallet and pulled out the platinum joint credit card Brad and I had shared for the last 7 years. I inserted the chip into the card reader and waited for the familiar approved beep. Instead, the machine emitted a harsh, discordant buzz. The screen flashed a bright red error message. Declined. The cashier gave me a sympathetic, apologetic smile. She suggested I try inserting it again, claiming the machine had been acting temperamental all morning. I knew better, but I obliged to avoid a scene. The machine buzzed again. Buzzed. Declined. Call card issuer. I did not panic. I calmly opened my wallet and retrieved my secondary joint debit card, the one linked directly to our shared checking account. I swiped the card. The same harsh buzz echoed at the register. Insufficient funds. A cold, analytical calm washed over me. I apologized to the cashier, pulled out a crisp $100 bill and a $50 from my emergency cash reserve, and handed it to her to cover the majority of the groceries, asking her to put back the steaks. I carried the brown paper bags to my car, loaded them into the trunk, and slid behind the steering wheel. I did not immediately start the engine. I sat in the silence of the parking lot and waited. I knew exactly what was coming next. Brad was a creature of absolute predictability. He never made a malicious move without ensuring his victim knew exactly who was holding the knife. Right on cue, my phone vibrated in the cup holder. The screen illuminated with a text message from Brad. I picked it up and read the paragraph he had clearly spent the morning drafting. "I hope you are enjoying your new life, Naomi," the text began. "I just got off the phone with the bank. Since you signed the property and equity release yesterday, my lawyers advised me to freeze all joint accounts immediately to protect my corporate assets. I also canceled your supplementary credit cards. You wanted to walk away so easily, so now you can figure out how to pay for your own life on a basic corporate salary. Let me know if you need to borrow money for rent. I might be feeling generous if you ask nicely." It was a textbook financial abuse tactic. He wanted to starve me out. He wanted to cut off my oxygen supply so abruptly that I would have no choice but to come crawling back begging for a handout. He wanted to watch me panic, to watch me realize that without his logistics empire I was utterly helpless. He expected me to call him immediately, screaming and crying about how unfair it was. He was probably sitting in his new sports car, staring at his phone, waiting for the frantic barrage of messages that would validate his ultimate power and feed his insatiable ego. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat. I did not type a single letter in response. I started the car and drove back to Jasmine and Jamal's house at a perfectly legal, unhurried pace. When I walked through the front door, I unpacked the groceries and neatly arranged them in the pantry and refrigerator. Then I walked back upstairs to the guest room, sat down at the small desk, and opened my laptop once again. Brad thought he had trapped me in a financial blackout, but he severely underestimated the foresight of a woman who tracks hidden assets for a living. 6 months ago, the very same week, I discovered the charge for the luxury suite in Aspen. I received my annual performance bonus from the auditing firm. It was a massive six-figure sum awarded for successfully untangling a complex corporate embezzlement case. Normally, I would have deposited that bonus directly into our joint investment portfolio. Instead, I quietly routed the entire amount into a specialized, legally untouchable offshore trust account I had established in the Isle of Man. It was a completely lawful maneuver fully declared to the IRS on my personal tax filings, but entirely invisible to Brad because he never bothered to look at my financial documents. He always assumed my income was negligible compared to his. I opened a secure browser and navigated to my international banking portal. I entered my credentials and authenticated my identity through a dual biometric scan. The screen displayed a pristine, untouched balance of over $300,000. I initiated a swift, untraceable wire transfer, moving $20,000 into a brand new checking account. Brad wanted to starve me out, but he had no idea I possessed a massive, untouchable war chest. He expected me to cry and beg for a handout. Instead, I smiled warmly, fully prepared to sit back and let him choke on my absolute silence. 4 days passed without a single word from me. Brad thrived on conflict, feeding off the desperate energy of the people he controlled. I left every message unread. I had pressing matters to attend to, namely the Summer Arts Academy showcase featuring Leo and Mia. The custody addendum dictated Brad would assume primary physical custody when their summer program concluded. Until then, they remained safely in my care, oblivious to the fact their father had just legally claimed a burning building. The showcase was held in the grand auditorium of their private academy. I arrived early wearing a tailored emerald green dress that projected absolute authority. I found my seat in the third row, perfectly positioned to capture the performance. The auditorium buzzed with wealthy parents, many of whom were the same people who texted me fake pity earlier in the week. I sat with perfect posture, completely unbothered by the side glances and hushed whispers rippling through the rows behind me. I was not the disgraced ex-wife they expected to see. I was a woman holding a royal flush. Just as the overhead lights began to dim, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the auditorium swung open loudly. Brad made his grand entrance, ensuring every head turned in his direction. He wore a custom charcoal suit projecting the image of a titan of industry. He did not walk in alone. Clutching his arm with exaggerated possession was Amber. She wore a tight designer cocktail dress undoubtedly purchased using stolen corporate funds. She desperately tried to project the image of the upgraded lady of the house, but merely looked like a lost intern playing dress-up in my discarded life. Brad scanned the audience, his eyes locking onto me instantly. A cruel smirk spread across his face. He guided Amber directly down the center aisle toward my row. There were plenty of empty seats near the back, but Brad was a predator who needed an audience for his kill. He stopped at the edge of my row, forcing two parents to stand up so he could push his way in. He chose the two empty seats directly to my right. Amber slid in first, pressing her shoulder against mine, drowning me in a cloud of heavily applied perfume. "Hello, Naomi," Brad whispered loudly, leaning across Amber. "I hope you did not mind me freezing the accounts. I figured you would appreciate the push to finally stand on your own 2 feet. Amber giggled. I did not turn my head to look at him. I kept my eyes fixed squarely on the heavy velvet curtains covering the stage. "I mind nothing, Brad," I replied smoothly. "I am self-sufficient. You should know that better than anyone." Amber shifted in her seat, flashing her diamond tennis bracelet. "Brad said you had to move into a tiny guest room," she chimed in, failing miserably to sound sympathetic. "We are just so excited to start fresh in the big house. We are already looking at new furniture for the foyer. The old stuff was too depressing." I slowly turned my head and looked directly into Amber's eyes. The fake sympathy on her face vanished under my cold gaze. "I highly recommend you hold off on making any expensive interior design decisions, Amber," I said quietly. "You might find your living situation changing abruptly in the near future. It would be a terrible shame to waste your logistics manager salary on furniture you cannot keep." Amber flinched, instinctively pulling back toward Brad. Brad leaned in closer, his jaw clenching with sudden irritation. He hated when he could not rattle me. He hated the calm certainty radiating from my posture. "Are you threatening us, Naomi?" he hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "If you are trying to act tough, it is not working. You are broke. You have nothing. I took everything from you, and there is not a single thing you can do to change that reality. You are going to sit here, watch my kids perform, and then walk back to your miserable little life while I take my beautiful new girlfriend back to my mansion." The auditorium lights faded to black, leaving only the soft glow of the stage lights illuminating the velvet curtains. The surrounding audience grew silent. This was the exact moment he wanted to break me, surrounded by the dark, trapped next to the woman who stole my life. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my voice pitched at a whisper that only he could hear. "I am not threatening you, Brad. I am giving you a friendly piece of advice. You have been running your supply chain company with incredible arrogance, thinking you are the smartest person in every single room. You assume that shifting numbers into offshore accounts and hiding behind fake vendor invoices made you invisible. You put your intern's digital signature on federal tax documents and convinced yourself you were a genius." I felt Brad go completely rigid next to Amber. His smug confidence vanished. "You demanded 100% of that company, Brad." I continued my words, sliding through the dark like a newly sharpened blade. "You legally claimed every single asset and every single liability. You demanded that I sign a contract severing myself from your entire operation. And I gave you exactly what you asked for. I handed you the sole ownership of a massive federal crime scene." "Enjoy the school play, Brad," I whispered, keeping my eyes fixed on the stage as the curtains finally began to rise. "Take plenty of pictures of Leo and Mia today. And when you go back to that massive empty mansion tonight, I highly suggest you brew a strong pot of coffee. You should really try to stay awake. People facing decades in a federal penitentiary rarely get a good night of sleep." I smiled warmly in the dark, leaving him to choke on his impending destruction. I stood up the second the heavy velvet curtains closed, smoothing the skirt of my emerald dress. I did not glance to my right. I did not need to see the sweat forming on Brad's forehead or the panic stretching across Amber's face. I picked up my purse and walked up the center aisle with the calm strides of a woman who had just delivered a fatal blow. The evening air felt refreshing. I slid into my sedan and navigated back to Jasmine and Jamal's house. My phone remained silent. Brad was likely too paralyzed by terror to type his usual arrogant messages. His silence was the sweetest sound I had heard all year. When I pulled into the driveway, Jamal's federal-issued SUV was parked near the garage. The lights in his home office were blazing. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the warm hallway. Before I could take off my coat, Jamal stepped out of his office. His relaxed demeanor was entirely gone. He wore his sharp prosecutor expression, his dark eyes focused and intense. He held a manila folder in his hand. "Naomi," Jamal said, his deep voice commanding attention. "Come into the office and close the door." I followed him into the room, listening to the door click shut. Jamal walked behind his massive oak desk and dropped the folder onto the polished surface. He crossed his arms and looked at me with professional gravity. "The Eagle has landed," Jamal stated. "My colleagues in the white-collar division called me into a highly classified briefing this afternoon. The anonymous forensic packet you routed through the secure server bypassed the initial screening protocols. It landed directly on the desk of the lead supervisor for the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. They cross-referenced your data with the FBI field office within 48 hours. They verified every offshore routing number, every phantom vendor invoice, and every forged signature you documented." I sat down in the leather guest chair. "How bad is the federal assessment, Jamal?" "It is a bloodbath," he replied, shaking his head. "The Joint Task Force officially classified Preston Logistics as a sophisticated front for wire fraud and systemic tax evasion. They spent the last 10 days quietly subpoenaing his domestic bank records to match the shadow ledgers you provided. Brad thought he was a genius for using multiple shell companies in Delaware to wash stolen revenue before funneling it to the Cayman Islands. But your flowcharts mapped his entire money laundering operation so flawlessly that federal agents barely had to dig. You handed them a fully wrapped, guaranteed conviction on a silver platter. I let out a slow, steady breath. The validation of my professional skills felt incredibly satisfying. "And Amber?" I asked. Jamal flipped open the manila folder, revealing several pages of heavily redacted federal documents. "Her digital signature is all over the fraudulent transfers, just like you promised. The FBI considers her an active co-conspirator. Brad essentially weaponized his own intern to insulate himself, but the federal government does not care about corporate titles or romantic relationships. They only care about the name attached to the illegal wire transfers. She is going down right alongside him. What about the divorce decree?" I pressed, needing to be absolutely certain my legal firewall was holding strong. "Did they flag my name during the asset search?" Jamal smiled, a sharp, triumphant expression. "That is the most brilliant part of your entire strategy, Naomi." The investigators pulled the marital asset records. They saw the freshly executed divorce decree filed by Brad's aggressive bulldog attorney. They saw the explicit indemnification clause where Brad demanded 100% sole ownership and full liability for the logistics firm. By legally forcing you to surrender all equity and explicitly taking on all corporate debt just 2 weeks ago, Brad completely severed you from the sinking ship before the federal government even issued their first subpoena. You are legally untouchable. The task force views you as a civilian ex-wife who was ruthlessly bullied out of her own company. You are completely in the clear. A wave of profound relief washed over my body. The sleepless nights, the meticulous decryption, the agonizing restraint I had to maintain while Brad taunted me, it had all paid off. I had built an impenetrable fortress around myself and my children, while my arrogant ex-husband happily locked himself inside a burning building. "So what happens now?" I asked, leaning forward. "When does the hammer finally fall?" Federal warrants take time to process, especially when multiple agencies coordinate a massive asset seizure, Jamal explained, tapping the folder. But given the flight risk associated with the offshore accounts and the sheer volume of stolen federal tax revenue, they are expediting the raid. They are securing the final judicial signatures by tomorrow morning. After that, it is only a matter of finding the perfect tactical moment to strike. They want to catch him completely off guard, surrounded by his illicit assets. I thought about the grand engagement and new life party Brad was hosting this coming weekend. He had sent out hundreds of digital invitations to his high-profile investors, local politicians, and wealthy country club neighbors. He wanted to use the Beacon Hill mansion to flaunt his ultimate victory over me and showcase Amber as his upgraded trophy wife. It was going to be the social event of the season. "Jamal," I said, a slow, calculated smile spreading across my face. "Brad is throwing a massive celebration at the mansion this Saturday night. He invited every major investor and corporate partner in the city. He wants to publicly gloat about his wealth and his complete control over the supply chain industry." Jamal leaned back in his chair, mirroring my smile. "Well, Naomi," he said softly, "it sounds like the FBI and the IRS just found the perfect venue for their upcoming tactical operation." Saturday evening arrived with the kind of oppressive humidity that only money could ignore. Up on Beacon Hill, my former mansion was blazing with light, transformed into a monument of Brad's unchecked narcissism. He had spared absolutely no expense for his grand engagement and new life celebration. According to the digital invitations floating around my mutual contacts, he had hired a Michelin-starred catering team, a 12-piece orchestra, and an army of valet drivers to manage the fleet of luxury vehicles clogging the private driveway. I knew all of this because my phone was pinging constantly with updates from former neighbors who were attending solely for the gossip. Inside the estate, Brad was holding court in the grand foyer. He wore a bespoke velvet tuxedo, a glass of vintage champagne gripped in his hand. He was surrounded by the exact demographic of people he had always desperately wanted to impress. Venture capitalists, local politicians, and the senior partners of major supply chain networks were all gathered around him, hanging on his every word. He was not just throwing a party. He was constructing a fortress of social validation. Amber stood glued to his side. She was draped in a sequined gown that looked violently out of place among the conservative wealth of Boston elite society. The massive diamond engagement ring on her finger caught the light from the chandelier, serving as a physical receipt for the stolen funds I had meticulously tracked. She smiled vacantly at the investors, occasionally chiming in to agree with whatever brilliant business insight Brad was currently fabricating. "I hear congratulations are in order for more than just the engagement," a prominent real estate developer said, clapping Brad on the shoulder. "Rumor has it you completely restructured Preston Logistics this month. 100% ownership is a bold move in this economic climate." Brad let out a loud, arrogant laugh. "It was the best business decision I ever made. My ex-wife wanted to drag out the divorce, but I made her an offer she could not refuse. I told her she could either walk away quietly or I would bury her in legal fees. She took the easy way out. Now I have total control of the board, total control of the assets, and zero dead weight holding the company back. I am expanding our international shipping routes by next quarter. The profits are already astronomical." The investors nodded approvingly, raising their glasses in a toast to his ruthlessness. They had no idea that the astronomical profits he was bragging about were entirely fictional, generated by ghost vendors and Delaware shell companies. They saw a supply chain genius. I knew he was just a glorified thief wearing a very expensive suit. Across the room, Gladys and Trent were busy treating the catered event like their own personal coronation. Gladys was wearing a brand new emerald necklace, loudly explaining to anyone who would listen how her son had finally found a woman who appreciated his worth. She made sure to casually mention how I had practically begged to keep the house, but Brad had rightfully kicked me to the curb. She reveled in the fabricated narrative of my defeat, desperate to erase the fact that my credit score had financed her lifestyle for the past decade. Trent was stationed near the open bar, aggressively networking with corporate executives. He was handing out premium cigars, introducing himself as the chief consulting officer for Preston Logistics. He boasted about his vital role in securing international freight contracts, completely oblivious to the fact that his leased BMW was currently sitting in a repossession lot because I had removed my name from his fraudulent paperwork. He was selling snake oil to a room full of sharks. Brad tapped a silver spoon against his champagne flute. The sharp ringing sound cut through the chatter and the orchestra immediately stopped playing. The room fell silent as hundreds of guests turned their attention toward the grand staircase. Brad took Amber by the hand and led her up 2 steps, elevating himself above the crowd. It was the perfect visual representation of his massive ego. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Brad announced, his voice booming across the marble foyer. "As many of you know, the last few weeks have been a period of massive transition for me. I shed a lot of unnecessary baggage, both personally and professionally. It takes a certain kind of vision to build an empire from the ground up, and it takes a certain kind of ruthless dedication to protect that empire from people who want to drag you down." He paused, looking down at Amber with a practiced look of adoration. "But tonight is not about the past. Tonight is about the future. With Amber by my side, and with total uncontested control of Preston Logistics, we are entering a new era of unprecedented wealth and expansion. I promised myself years ago that I would be the most successful man in this room, and standing here tonight, looking at my house, my company, and my beautiful fiancée, I can confidently say I have won. To the future." To the future, the crowd echoed a chorus of wealthy enablers raising their glasses to a man who was actively robbing them blind. Brad beamed, soaking in the applause. He felt invincible. He had successfully manipulated the legal system, discarded his wife, secured his children, and flaunted his stolen wealth in front of the entire city. He believed his own lies so thoroughly that he could not even perceive the danger lurking just beyond his heavy iron gates. He thought the divorce decree was his ultimate shield. He thought he had outsmarted a forensic accountant by demanding sole liability for a criminal enterprise. He was throwing the party of the century to celebrate his own impending incarceration. The champagne flowed freely, the laughter echoed off the custom artwork, The expensive catered food was consumed by oblivious guests. It was a perfectly orchestrated scene of ultimate victory. But victory is incredibly fragile when it is built entirely on a foundation of federal wire fraud and tax evasion. Brad had successfully gathered all of his illicit assets, all of his co-conspirators, and all of his arrogant pride into one single convenient location. He had set the stage flawlessly. He just did not realize that the grand finale of his exclusive engagement bash had already been written by the woman he claimed to have defeated. I slowly pulled my reliable sedan up to the towering iron gates of the Beacon Hill estate just as the string quartet began playing. The private driveway was choked with luxury vehicles, and a small army of valets in crisp white shirts rushed around to manage the overflow. When I rolled down my window, the head of security recognized me instantly. He had worked for us for 3 years, and despite the messy divorce, he still held a quiet respect for the woman who actually signed his paychecks on time. I said I needed to retrieve Leo and Mia's camp medical records from the safe in the home office. Brad was legally required to provide them before the custody switch, and he had ignored my emails. The security guard nodded, keyed his radio, and let me through the gates without a second thought. I parked far away from the flashy sports cars of the investors. I stepped out wearing a pristine white silk blouse and tailored black trousers. The heavy oak front doors were propped wide open, spilling warm light, and the sound of clinking crystal onto the manicured lawn. I walked right into the lion's den. The moment my heels clicked against the marble foyer, the atmosphere shifted. Guests turned their heads, eyes widening as they recognized the discarded ex-wife crashing the celebration of the century. I kept my posture straight, my chin high and my expression unreadable. I walked through the sea of expensive suits with the absolute authority of a woman who owned the ground she stood on. Naomi. The sharp voice of my mother-in-law sliced through the tension. Gladys pushed her way through a group of politicians, her face flushed with pure indignation. Trent followed closely behind, eager to play the loyal attack dog. "What on earth are you doing here?" Gladys hissed, stepping directly into my path. "You have zero right to be inside this house." "I need Leo and Mia's camp medical clearance forms," I replied evenly, not breaking my stride as I forced her to step backward. Brad securely locked the hard copies in the home office safe. "I have absolutely no interest at all in your son's catered delusion." Trent puffed out his chest, blocking the hallway. "You are trespassing, Naomi. You are just jealous because Amber is wearing a rock the size of a golf ball. Leave right now before I call security." "Your leased corporate vehicle was repossessed yesterday morning, Trent," I said calmly. "I saw the tow truck hitch it up while you were sleeping off a hangover. I suggest you lower your voice before I tell these lovely investors why you are taking the bus to work next week." Trent went completely pale, stepping aside instantly. I continued down the hall, but a heavy hand grabbed my shoulder. I turned around to find Brad towering over me. Amber was clinging to his other arm, holding a full glass of dark red wine. "Have you lost your mind?" Brad growled, his grip tightening. "You crashed my engagement party to cause a scene. I will have the judge strip your visitation rights by Monday morning. Get out before I destroy you." I calmly removed his hand from my shoulder. "I need the medical records from the safe, Brad. Hand them over and I will happily leave you to your audience." Brad let out a mocking laugh, turning to ensure his investors were watching. "You are pathetic, Naomi. You could not stand the fact that I am thriving without you. You had to come here and beg for attention. Look at my company, my house, my gorgeous fiancé. You are nothing but a bitter accountant who could not keep her husband happy." Amber stepped forward, emboldened by Brad's cruel speech. She wanted to prove to the crowd that she was the new apex predator. She looked at my pristine white silk blouse, then looked down at her glass of red wine. With a smug, calculated smile, she deliberately stumbled forward. She thrust her hand out, splashing the entire glass of dark red wine directly onto the center of my chest. The cold liquid soaked through the white silk, instantly leaving a massive glaring stain across my clothes. Several guests gasped in shock. Gladys let out a bark of laughter. "Oh my gosh, I am so incredibly sorry," Amber said loudly, her voice dripping with fake exaggerated pity. "I guess I am just so overwhelmed by how amazing my new life is. I completely lost my balance. You should probably go home and change, Naomi. That cheap blouse is completely ruined." Brad smirked, wrapping his arm around Amber's waist. He looked at the massive red stain waiting for the inevitable breakdown. He expected me to cry, to scream, to run out of the mansion in absolute humiliation, while his guests laughed at my defeat. He wanted a messy spectacle to cement his narrative that I was unstable. I stood perfectly still. The cold wine clung to my skin, but my heart rate did not spike. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a crisp white handkerchief. I calmly dabbed the stray drops of wine from my hands with the deliberate precision of a surgeon. I looked at Amber's smug face, then at Brad's arrogant grin. Casually, I raised my left wrist and checked the face of my silver watch. It was exactly 8:14 in the evening. I smiled, a genuine expression of pure anticipation. "You are absolutely right, Amber," I said very clearly. "My blouse is ruined. But I do not mind the mess. Red is a fantastic color for a celebration. And as for you, Brad," I tapped the glass face of my watch, "I told you to get some sleep. Your time is officially up." Before Brad could open his mouth to ask what I meant, a deafening sound shattered the quiet evening air. It was not the string quartet. It was the screaming, unmistakable wail of federal sirens. The wail of federal sirens shattered the acoustic environment of the Beacon Hill estate. It was a piercing sound that bounced off the marble pillars and swallowed the notes of the string quartet whole. The cellist dropped his bow. The chatter of venture capitalists died instantly. Everyone froze, their champagne flutes suspended in midair. The towering arched windows at the front of the foyer suddenly pulsed with flashes of red and blue light, painting the terrified faces of the elite guests in harsh colors. Brad loosened his grip on Amber. The smug grin melted off his face, replaced by sharp confusion. He tried to speak, but the deafening roar of heavy engines tearing up his cobblestone driveway drowned out his voice. Through the massive glass panes flanking the entryway, the guests watched their exclusive reality shatter. Dozens of matte black federal SUVs swarmed the property. They drove over the manicured hedges, crushed the exotic flowers, and formed a tactical blockade around the perimeter. The private valet drivers scattered like frightened mice, abandoning luxury sports cars with doors wide open. The sheer scale of the operation was breathtaking. It was an overwhelming show of federal force designed to secure a massive crime scene before digital evidence could be destroyed. Armed agents wearing tactical vests, emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of the FBI and the IRS, poured out of the vehicles. They moved with terrifying precision, securing the gates, the rear terrace, and every exit point. The wealthy party guests began to panic, backing away from the windows and shattering expensive glass on the imported Italian marble. The heavy oak front doors were violently shoved back against the walls. A dozen federal agents stormed into the grand foyer, their boots echoing like gunshots against the stone floor. "Nobody move. Keep your hands where we can see them. Stay exactly where you are." The commands were sharp and left absolutely no room for debate. Politicians cowered against the walls. Amber let out a high-pitched shriek, dropping her wine glass. It shattered at her feet, splashing dark liquid over her sequined gown. I did not flinch. I stood perfectly still, my own wine-stained silk blouse acting as a stark contrast to the absolute calm radiating from my posture. Then the sea of tactical vests parted, creating a clear path through the center of the panicked crowd. Jamal stepped across the threshold. My brother-in-law looked magnificent. As a seasoned assistant United States attorney, Jamal possessed an inherently commanding presence. The towering African-American prosecutor wore a flawless midnight blue suit that rivaled any garment in the room, but it was the gold federal badge clipped to his belt and the thick leather portfolio in his hand that commanded absolute obedience. He scanned the grand foyer, his sharp eyes sweeping over the terrified executives until they locked directly onto Brad. Jamal walked with deliberate strides toward the grand staircase. Two senior FBI agents flanked him, their expressions carved from stone. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. Gladys, who had been loudly boasting about her son, just minutes prior, pressed her back against a marble pillar, clutching her pink Chanel bag like a life preserver. Trent was nowhere to be seen, likely cowering behind the catering station. Brad finally found his voice. He puffed out his chest, desperately trying to summon the arrogant corporate titan persona that had fueled him for the last decade. "What is the meaning of this?" Brad demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "You are trespassing on private property. This is an exclusive private event. I demand to know who is in charge here. I am calling my lawyers immediately. You have no right to barge into my home." Jamal stopped exactly 3 feet away from Brad. He did not raise his voice. He projected the quiet, absolute authority of the federal government. "I am the one in charge here," Jamal stated smoothly. "And as of exactly 8:14 this evening, this property is an active federal crime scene. Nobody is making any phone calls, nobody is leaving this building, and nobody is touching a single electronic device." Jamal held up the thick leather portfolio. "I hold a warrant authorized by a federal judge for the immediate search and seizure of this entire estate, all associated corporate vehicles, and all electronic hardware contained within these walls. We are seizing servers, laptops, physical ledgers, and every digital asset you possess." Brad swallowed hard. The remaining color vanished from his cheeks. "A search warrant for what? On what grounds?" "My company is completely legitimate. I have done nothing wrong." Jamal opened the portfolio and extracted a thick stack of heavily redacted documents. "There is no misunderstanding," Jamal corrected, his deep voice carrying across the silent room. "You are currently the primary target of a joint task force investigation conducted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The warrants have been issued based on irrefutable probable cause regarding multiple counts of federal wire fraud, systemic tax evasion, interstate money laundering, and corporate conspiracy." The wealthy investors surrounding Brad instinctively took several large steps backward, distancing themselves from the toxic blast radius of a federal indictment. They looked at Brad as if he were carrying a highly contagious disease. Amber began to hyperventilate, her manicured hands trembling as she clutched Brad's velvet tuxedo jacket. "What is he talking about?" "Brad?" Amber cried out, her voice shrill with panic. "Tell them they are making a mistake. Tell them to leave." Brad could not speak. His eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for an escape route that did not exist. He looked at the armed agents securing the doors. He looked at Jamal holding the federal warrants. Finally, his panicked gaze landed squarely on me. I stood just a few feet away, entirely unbothered by the chaos unfolding around me. I offered him a slow, perfectly calm smile. The gears in his arrogant mind finally began to turn. He looked at my wine-stained shirt, he looked at my watch, and he looked at the federal prosecutor standing in his foyer. The realization struck him like a physical blow. He finally understood that I had not walked into the lion's den to beg for my life. I had walked in to lock the cage. Two senior FBI agents stepped forward, their movements swift and practiced. They grabbed Brad by the arms, spinning him around and slamming him face first against one of his prized marble pillars. The sound of his custom velvet tuxedo jacket tearing slightly echoed through the massive foyer. Metal handcuffs clicked sharply into place around his wrists, locking his hands behind his back. The sickening reality of his situation finally broke through his arrogant delusion. He struggled against the agents, kicking his polished leather shoes against the stone floor, his face pressed awkwardly against the cold marble. "You have the right to remain silent." One of the agents began reciting, his voice a dull monotone that contrasted violently with the sheer panic erupting across the room. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "Get your hands off me!" Brad screamed, his voice muffled by the pillar. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am a prominent business owner. You are making a massive mistake. I will have your badges for this." The investors, the politicians, and the country club elite were no longer looking at him with admiration. They were staring at him with absolute disgust and raw terror. Cell phones were suddenly out recording the magnificent downfall of the man who had just toasted to his own unstoppable future. These were people who survived by distancing themselves from sinking ships. Brad was no longer a titan of industry. He was a radioactive liability. Amber was sobbing uncontrollably now, shrinking away from the agents who were securing the perimeter. Gladys was clutching her chest, breathing heavily, while Trent remained completely invisible, too cowardly to step forward and defend his brother. The agents pulled Brad away from the pillar and turned him around to face the crowd. His custom suit was ruined. His hair was disheveled. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated desperation. He looked around the room, his eyes wild and unfocused until they landed on me again. I was still standing perfectly composed, my posture immaculate despite the wine stain on my silk blouse. A dark, venomous realization washed over Brad's features. If he was going down, he was going to drag me straight into the fiery abyss with him. "Arrest her!" Brad shrieked, thrashing against the grip of the federal agents. He thrust his chin in my direction, spit flying from his lips. "Why are you putting cuffs on me? She is the one you want. She is my wife. She is a senior forensic accountant for a massive auditing firm. She handles all the numbers. She managed the accounts. She set this entire thing up to frame me because she was bitter about our divorce. Arrest her right now." The sudden accusation hung in the air. A few of the investors glanced at me, whispering furiously to one another. Amber stopped sobbing for a fraction of a second, her eyes darting toward me with a sudden spark of malicious hope. I did not break a sweat. I did not take a step backward. I simply looked at Jamal. Jamal let out a deep, resonant sigh. He shook his head, looking at Brad with the distinct brand of pity reserved for the truly ignorant. He unzipped his thick leather portfolio and pulled out a single, heavily stapled legal document. It was not a federal warrant. It was printed on the thick, expensive stationery of Brad's own bulldog divorce attorney. "That is a fascinating accusation," Brad Jamal said, his voice projecting clearly across the silent, captivated audience. "And under normal circumstances, the spouse of a federal target, especially one with a background in corporate accounting, would absolutely be brought in for rigorous questioning. We would seize her accounts. We would freeze her assets. We would tear her professional life apart, looking for any connection to your money laundering operation." Brad grinned, a sick, desperate smile forming on his face. "Exactly. She is guilty. Take her in." However, Jamal continued, taking a slow step toward the handcuffed man. "We already reviewed the marital asset division. We reviewed the specific legally binding documents you forced her to sign exactly 14 days ago in a recorded legal setting." Jamal held up the divorce decree, turning to a specific page marked with a bright yellow sticky note. "Let me read this for the room," Jamal announced. Page 4, Section 3. "The husband, Bradley Preston, hereby assumes 100% sole ownership and exclusive equity of Preston Logistics and all its subsidiaries. Furthermore, the husband assumes sole, exclusive, and total liability for all corporate debts, obligations, and legal encumbrances, past, present, and future, explicitly indemnifying the wife, Naomi Preston, from any and all corporate responsibility." Jamal lowered the document and looked Brad dead in the eye. "You demanded total control, Brad. You explicitly forced your wife to legally sever herself from your company because you were terrified she might take half of your future profits. You mandated that your own lawyer draft an ironclad indemnification clause to lock her out of your wealth. And she signed it. She legally walked away from your sinking ship 2 weeks before the federal government even drafted these warrants." The color drained from Brad's face entirely. His knees buckled slightly, but the agents held him up. "No," Brad gasped, shaking his head. "No, that was just for the divorce. She knows the business. She knows the accounts. She knows nothing legally binding," Jamal corrected sharply. "You took sole liability. You claimed 100% ownership. You are the sole captain of this criminal enterprise, Brad. Naomi is legally untouchable. She is a civilian who was bullied out of her marital assets by a greedy, arrogant ex-husband. The federal government has absolutely zero jurisdiction to hold her accountable for a company you swore under penalty of perjury she had no part in. I took a slow, deliberate step forward. The crowd parted for me. I stopped right in front of Brad. He looked absolutely broken. The man who had mocked my career, who had flaunted his young intern, who had threatened to reduce me to eating ramen in a studio apartment, was now a trembling, handcuffed criminal begging for mercy. "I told you I was just a bean counter," I said softly, my voice carrying a lethal calm. "I told you I just sat at a desk all day. But you forgot that I track thieves for a living. You were so blinded by your own narcissism that you actually paid your lawyer to draft my federal immunity. You built the cage, Brad. I just handed you the padlock. You ruined my life," Brad sobbed, his voice cracking as the agents began to drag him toward the open front doors. "You set me up. I survived you," I corrected, stepping aside as they pulled him toward the waiting fleet of black SUVs, and I did it with a single stroke of a pen. I watched him being hauled out into the flashing red and blue lights, a disgraced fraud stripped of his power, his wealth, and his future. The perfect payoff was complete, and I had not broken a single law to achieve it. The grand foyer of the Beacon Hill mansion, which just 20 minutes ago buzzed with the arrogant laughter of Boston corporate elites, now resembled a chaotic disaster zone. Wealthy investors and influential politicians scrambled toward the exits, their earlier adoration for Brad evaporating the second the federal agents displayed their badges. They bumped into one another, spilling expensive champagne on the imported rugs, desperate to distance themselves from a man who was about to become the headline of a major federal indictment. I stood near the sweeping mahogany staircase, calmly brushing a lingering drop of wine from my sleeve, and watched the systematic dismantling of my ex-husband's stolen empire. Federal agents moved with practiced clinical efficiency. They did not care about the custom velvet suits or the Michelin-starred catering. They cared about the assets. Two agents marched past me carrying heavy plastic storage bins, heading straight for the home office where Brad kept his encrypted servers and offshore banking tokens. Another team began photographing the expensive modern art hanging on the walls, cross-referencing the pieces with the fraudulent purchase orders I had meticulously cataloged in my anonymous tip. Outside, the harsh glare of the red and blue police lights illuminated the driveway as agents began slapping seizure notices onto the windshields of Brad's luxury vehicles. The cherry red sports car he had flaunted around the neighborhood was currently being hooked up to a federal tow truck. In the center of this absolute destruction stood Amber. Her sequined designer gown, already ruined by the wine she had deliberately spilled on me, seemed to hang loosely on her shaking frame. The 24-year-old intern who had gleefully posted selfies in my former closet was now hyperventilating. Her wide, panicked eyes darted across the room, tracking the federal agents as they systematically tagged every single item of value she thought she had secured by destroying my marriage. She watched an agent place a bright red evidence sticker on the custom velvet sofa. She watched another agent confiscate the keys to the luxury SUV she had been driving. The devastating reality of her situation was finally crashing down upon her. She was not the new lady of the house. She was a documented co-conspirator standing inside a federal crime scene. Brad was still standing near the massive oak front doors, flanked by two towering FBI agents who were waiting for the transport vehicle to pull up to the porch. His hands were securely cuffed behind his back. His face was pale, slick with sweat, and twisted into a mask of pure desperation. He caught Amber staring at him. A pathetic, pleading look washed over his features. He desperately needed validation. He needed someone, anyone, to look at him with the admiration he had spent millions of stolen dollars to buy. "Amber," Brad called out, his voice cracking pitifully. "Amber, honey, listen to me. Call my defense lawyers. Tell them to freeze everything. Tell them we are fighting this. I am going to fix this. I promise you, I will fix this. Just wait for me." Amber slowly turned her head and looked at the man she had proudly claimed just an hour ago. The superficial adoration she normally projected was completely gone. In its place was the cold, hard calculus of sheer self-preservation. She was young, but she was not entirely stupid. She looked at the federal agents boxing up the financial documents bearing her digital signature. She looked at the flashing lights outside. She looked at the pathetic handcuffed fraud standing by the door. "Fix this!" Amber shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the marble foyer. "How are you going to fix this, Brad? The FBI is literally towing your cars away. They are taking the house. They are taking the bank accounts. You told me you were a millionaire. You told me you built an unstoppable empire. You said your boring ex-wife was just jealous of our success." "I am a millionaire," Brad pleaded, pulling against the grip of the federal agents. "It is just a misunderstanding with the tax filings. I have offshore accounts. We have plenty of capital. I can provide for you. Just stay here and call the legal team." Amber let out a harsh, hysterical laugh. "Stay here. Are you completely insane? The federal government is evicting everyone from this property tonight. I do not have a home. I do not have a job. I am probably going to federal prison because you made me sign those fake logistics invoices. You lied to me about everything. You are not a titan of industry. You are a broke, pathetic criminal who got outsmarted by his own accountant wife." Brad opened his mouth to defend his shattered ego, but no words came out. Amber did not give him the chance to speak. She marched directly toward him, her high heels clicking aggressively against the stone floor. The federal agents shifted slightly, prepared to intercept her, but she stopped just out of their reach. She raised her left hand, the massive diamond engagement ring, catching the harsh glare of the police lights outside. "I am not going down for your sloppy mistakes," Amber spat, contorted with absolute disgust. "I am done with you, Brad. I am done with this fake life." She grabbed the diamond ring, violently twisting it off her finger. With a sharp, aggressive throwing motion, she hurled the heavy piece of expensive jewelry directly at Brad's chest, ensuring it hit him as hard as she possibly could. It bounced right off his ruined velvet tuxedo and clattered loudly against the imported marble floor. He had absolutely nothing left but tight handcuffs and the terrifying reality of a federal prison. He had absolutely nothing left but tight handcuffs and the terrifying reality of a federal prison. Amber did not wait for a response. She spun on her stiletto heel and marched out the front doors, stepping right over the discarded ring and disappearing into the chaotic, flashing lights of the driveway. Brad let out a guttural, pathetic sob as the two FBI agents finally shoved him forward, guiding him out of the mansion and shoving him into the back of a heavily armored federal transport vehicle. The heavy doors slammed shut, cutting off his frantic pleas for a lawyer. Inside the grand foyer, the remaining air was sucked out of the room. The few lingering investors had already fled through the side exits, desperate to avoid the flashbulbs of the local news crews that were undoubtedly rushing toward Beacon Hill. I remained near the sweeping mahogany staircase, watching Jamal coordinate the next phase of the raid. He signaled to a group of agents carrying thick stacks of federal eviction notices. Jamal cleared his throat, his deep voice easily cutting through the noise of agents boxing up electronic devices. "Attention, all remaining occupants. This property, along with all assets, furnishings, and vehicles currently located on the premises, has been officially seized by the United States government under federal asset forfeiture laws. You have exactly 10 minutes to collect your immediate personal belongings, such as coats and cell phones. Any attempt to remove jewelry, electronics, or financial documents will be treated as tampering with federal evidence, and you will be arrested on the spot." I watched the realization hit Gladys and Trent. They had been huddled near the catering station trying to remain invisible while Brad took the fall. Now the federal spotlight was shining directly on them. Gladys clutched her pink Chanel bag against her chest, her knuckles turning white. Trent looked like he was going to be sick. "Excuse me," Gladys shrieked, her voice shaking as she pushed herself away from the wall. "You cannot simply throw us out onto the street in the middle of the night. This is my son's house. I am a guest here. I demand to speak to whoever is in charge of this ridiculous misunderstanding. We have rights." Jamal turned slowly, fixing my mother-in-law with a look of absolute professional ice. "I am in charge, ma'am, and your son no longer owns this house. Your son purchased this estate using shell companies funded by massive wire fraud. Therefore, the house was bought with stolen money. It is currently federal evidence. You do not have rights to reside inside a piece of federal evidence. I strongly suggest you use your 10 minutes wisely to find a coat." Trent stepped forward, his earlier arrogance entirely replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. "Wait, hold on a second. What about my apartment downtown? Brad pays the lease through Preston Logistics as part of my consulting compensation package. Is that seized too?" Jamal did not even need to check his file. He looked at Trent with a mixture of amusement and pity. "If your lease is paid through Preston Logistics corporate accounts, then yes, the federal government has already frozen that lease. The landlord was notified an hour ago. You cannot go back there. Furthermore, any consulting salary you received from that company is considered the proceeds of a crime. I would highly advise you to retain a defense attorney, Trent, because the IRS will be looking very closely at your tax returns to see exactly how you categorize that stolen money." Trent staggered backward, hitting the edge of a catering table. The expensive crystal glasses rattled loudly. He was essentially homeless, jobless, and potentially facing an audit that would destroy his life. He looked out the window, realizing his leased BMW was already gone towed away because I had removed my name from the paperwork. He had absolutely no car, no apartment, and no brother to bail him out. Gladys began to hyperventilate. Her perfectly styled hair was falling out of place. She looked frantically around the grand foyer, watching agents place bright red evidence tape on the custom velvet sofa she had been sitting on just hours ago. She realized the money was gone. Brad was not a secret billionaire who experienced a temporary cash flow problem. He was a fraud, and the fountain of wealth had permanently dried up. She locked eyes with me. I was still standing by the stairs, my expression calm and detached. Naomi Gladys gasped, practically running across the marble floor toward me. "Naomi, please, you have to help us. You know we had nothing to do with this. You know Brad kept us in the dark. We have nowhere to go. My credit cards are all linked to his accounts. They are all declining." I looked at the woman who had spent the last decade tearing me down. The woman who had sneered at my career, who had celebrated my eviction, and who had eagerly welcomed Amber into my home. "That is a terrible shame, Gladys," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "But as you reminded me earlier today, I do not have the pedigree to maintain a lifestyle of this caliber. I am just a poor working-class nobody. I certainly cannot afford to support you and Trent. You should probably ask your wealthy country club friends for a loan. I am sure they will be thrilled to help the mother of a federal criminal, but we are family." Gladys pleaded, tears finally spilling over her mascara. "You cannot just leave us on the street. We supported you. You supported Brad when he brought his 24-year-old intern to my children's school play." I corrected her sharply. "You celebrated when he forced me to sign away my company. You sat on that velvet sofa today and told me I was walking away with nothing. You were wrong, Gladys. I walked away with my freedom. You are the one walking away with nothing." Trent stumbled over to us, looking completely broken. "Naomi, come on. We can stay at your place just for a few nights until we figure this out. You have that big severance check, right? You can help us get a hotel." "I do not have a severance check, Trent," I replied smoothly. "I have my own money earned through my own hard work. The same hard work you claimed was just me riding your brother's coattails. And my new living arrangements are not open to people who helped facilitate my emotional abuse. You are a vital logistics consultant. I am sure you can figure out how to transport yourself to a homeless shelter." Two federal agents approached our group. "Time is up," one of the agents announced firmly. "You need to vacate the premises immediately. Walk toward the front gates. The local police have set up a perimeter outside, and they will direct you away from the property." Gladys began to sob loudly, clutching her pink Chanel bag. The bag I was still paying for. The bag that was technically the only legitimate asset she possessed because it was tied to my credit, not Brad's fraud. "Please," Naomi Gladys cried out as the agents took her by the arms and began guiding her toward the open front doors. "Please do not do this. I did not do anything, Gladys, I said, watching them being escorted out into the cold night air. I simply let Brad build his own cage, have a safe walk down the hill. Trent did not say another word. He kept his head down, shivering in his thin dress shirt as he walked out into the flashing red and blue lights. The heavy oak doors remained open, letting the crisp evening breeze sweep through the mansion. The suffocating arrogance that had plagued this house for years was finally gone. I looked at Jamal, who gave me a firm, respectful nod. The raid was proceeding perfectly. The eviction was complete. My former in-laws were officially out on the street, entirely stripped of the stolen luxury they had weaponized against me. I checked my watch, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. It was time to handle the final pieces of the wreckage. I walked out of the grand foyer, leaving the federal agents to their methodical dismantling of Preston logistics. The cool night air was a welcome relief against my skin, washing away the lingering scent of expensive catered food and desperate panic. I got into my sedan and drove back to the quiet, unassuming suburban neighborhood where my sister lived. The contrast between the flashing sirens on Beacon Hill and the silent tree-lined streets of Newton was poetic. I had survived the storm, and now I was simply waiting for the final thunderclap. When I walked into the house, the kitchen was dark save for the small light glowing above the stove. I poured myself a glass of cold water and sat at the granite island. The digital clock on the microwave read 2:14 in the morning. Jamal was still at the raid site coordinating the massive seizure of assets, and Jasmine was asleep upstairs. My children, Leo and Mia, were safely tucked away in their cabins at summer camp in Maine, blissfully unaware that their father's criminal empire had just imploded on national television. I had already spoken to the camp director earlier in the week, ensuring my name was the only one authorized for their pickup at the end of the month. Every loose end was tied, every vulnerability was secured. Then my cell phone vibrated against the granite countertop. The screen illuminated the dark kitchen. The caller ID displayed an unknown number, but I recognized the specific area code and prefix. It was the designated outbound routing number for the federal holding facility in downtown Boston. Brad had been processed, booked, and stripped of his custom velvet tuxedo. He was currently sitting in a concrete cell, wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, and he was using his one guaranteed phone call to reach the woman he had spent the last year trying to destroy. I took a slow sip of water, savoring the absolute silence of the house, before tapping the green accept button. An automated voice filled the kitchen. "You have a collect call from an inmate at a federal correctional facility. Please press 1 to accept." I pressed 1. Naomi, Brad gasped, his voice cracking with a level of raw, unadulterated terror I had never heard from him before. "Naomi, please tell me you are there. Please do not hang up the phone. I am here, Brad," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotional inflection. "I assume the federal holding cell is slightly less comfortable than the master suite you demanded in the divorce." "Listen to me," he pleaded, completely ignoring my sarcasm. He was breathing heavily, his words tumbling out in a frantic, disorganized rush. "It is a complete nightmare down here. They took everything. They stripped me, they took my watch, my phone. They froze all the corporate accounts. The agents are talking about wire fraud and RICO charges. They are saying I could be denied bail because of the offshore accounts. Naomi, you have to help me. You have to get me out of here." "And how exactly do you expect me to do that, Brad?" I asked smoothly. "You specifically ensured I was locked out of your financial empire. You bragged about it to a room full of investors just hours ago." "I know you have money," Brad begged, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "You are a senior accountant. You have a massive salary. You have bonuses saved up. You always planned for emergencies. You need to hire a defense attorney for me. You need to wire your savings to the bail bondsman first thing in the morning. They are going to set a massive bond, and I cannot access a single dime. My lawyers are not answering my calls because their retainers were paid from the frozen corporate accounts." I leaned back against the bar stool, staring at the glowing numbers on the microwave. You want me to empty my personal, legally earned savings to bail you out of a federal holding facility. The same savings you threatened to bleed dry in family court. We can fight about the divorce later. Brad sobbed, the sound echoing pathetically over the prison phone line. We have to think about Leo and Mia. You cannot let the father of your children rot in a federal prison. Think about what this will do to them. They need their dad. You have to do this for the kids, Naomi. Please, for the sake of our children, get me out of here. He was trying to use the ultimate manipulation tactic. He was weaponizing the children he had barely paid attention to for the last 5 years. He thought his sudden, desperate appeal to my maternal instincts would override my logic. He still vastly underestimated the woman he had married. I am thinking about the kids, Brad, I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal calm. In fact, I spent the entire morning thinking about them. While you were busy ordering champagne and picking out a sequined dress for your intern, I was sitting in a different courtroom with my lawyer, David. The line went dead silent save for the heavy, ragged sound of Brad breathing. What courtroom? He asked, a new wave of panic creeping into his tone. Family court. I answered precisely. I filed an emergency ex parte motion for sole legal and physical custody of Leo and Mia at 9 o'clock yesterday morning. I submitted a sealed affidavit detailing the impending federal indictment against you, the massive financial fraud, and the unstable criminal environment you deliberately exposed our children to by moving your co-conspirator into their primary residence. You cannot do that, Brad screamed, his voice echoing off the concrete walls of his cell. The divorce decree gave me primary custody starting at the end of the month. You signed the addendum. You gave them to me. I signed a piece of paper that proved you were eager to use our children as pawns, I corrected him sharply. But family court judges do not tend to honor custody addendums when the primary custodial parent is actively facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and tax evasion. The judge reviewed the evidence of your criminal enterprise. The emergency order was granted immediately. Your custody rights are completely suspended, Brad. They are void. You have zero legal authority over Leo and Mia. No. Brad wailed, a visceral sound of total defeat. Naomi, please. You cannot take my kids away. You took the company. You let them take the house. Do not take my kids. I did not take anything from you, I stated coldly. You surrendered your right to be a father the second you decided to build your life on a foundation of federal crimes and absolute arrogance. You used everyone around you. You used Amber. You used your brother. You used your mother, and you tried to use me. But you will never ever use my children as a bargaining chip for your bail. Naomi, please, I am begging you, he cried, his voice breaking into pathetic, jagged sobs. I have absolutely nothing left. Everyone is gone. Amber left me. My mother is not answering. Trent is gone. I am entirely alone in here. You are the only person who can fix this. I will do whatever you want. I will rip up the divorce decree. I will give you everything back. Just do not leave me in here. I listened to his desperate, broken pleas for exactly 10 seconds. I wanted to memorize the sound of his absolute surrender. I wanted to remember the exact moment the narcissistic titan of logistics finally realized he was nothing more than a small, terrified criminal trapped in a cage of his own making. You demanded 100% of the liability, Brad, I said, my voice echoing with finality over the prison line. I suggest you get comfortable. You are going to be carrying that liability for a very long time. I reached out and pressed the red button on my phone, instantly severing the connection. The kitchen returned to its perfect, unbroken silence. The final piece of the wreckage had been handled. I set my phone face down on the granite island, walked upstairs to the comfortable guest bedroom, and slept better than I had in over a decade. I woke up the next morning feeling entirely refreshed. The guest bedroom was bathed in warm sunlight. I stretched deeply, enjoying the weightless sensation in my chest. The chaotic symphony of the previous night felt like a distant memory. I walked downstairs to find Jasmine and Jamal at the kitchen island drinking coffee and watching the morning news. The television screen displayed a massive banner about the raid on Beacon Hill. The local anchor discussed the spectacular downfall of a prominent logistics chief executive officer. Jamal pointed at the screen with his mug. They are calling it the largest corporate fraud bust in the state this year, he noted with professional satisfaction. The asset seizure alone is going to take weeks to fully process. I poured myself a cup of coffee and leaned against the granite counter. I asked if there was any word on the accomplices. Jamal confirmed the intern was cooperating fully to save herself, handing over every piece of digital evidence that was not already in the encrypted drive. I finally retrieved my phone from the kitchen counter where I had left it after hanging up on Brad. The screen was lit up with notifications. There were dozens of missed calls and frantic text messages. But they were not from Brad. They were from Gladys and Trent. The mother and brother who had stood in my closet 24 hours earlier, mocking my corporate salary and gloating over my eviction, were now experiencing the harsh reality of sudden homelessness. I opened the message thread from Gladys first. The tone had shifted drastically from arrogant entitlement to sheer unadulterated panic. "Naomi, please pick up the phone." The first message read, "Sent at 3 in the morning. The federal agents locked us out. My credit cards are declining everywhere. We slept in a 24-hour diner. Please, we have nowhere to go." A follow-up message from Trent came an hour later. "Naomi, I know we said some harsh things yesterday, but you cannot leave family on the street. Brad's accounts are totally frozen. My landlord will not even let me into my apartment to get my clothes. Please let us stay in your guest room, just for a week until we figure this out." I stared at the bright screen, feeling a profound sense of irony. These were the exact same people who had sneered at me when I was given 24 hours to pack my life into boxes. They had proudly stood by while Brad attempted to financially starve me out. They had worshipped the stolen money and eagerly participated in my emotional execution. Now stripped of their stolen luxury, they suddenly remembered the concept of family. They suddenly believed in compassion and mutual support. I read the text messages aloud to Jasmine and Jamal. Jasmine let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Are they seriously asking to sleep in my house after they spent years treating you like garbage?" she asked, crossing her arms tightly. "Tell them the guest room is currently occupied by someone who actually works for a living." Jamal simply shook his head, amazed by the sheer audacity of their request. "The absolute lack of self-awareness is staggering," he said. "They built their entire personalities around Brad's fraudulent wealth. Now that the money is gone, they are completely empty-handed and looking for a new host to leech off of." I did not need Jasmine or Jamal to tell me what to do. I walked over to the kitchen table, set my coffee mug down, and began to type my response. I did not write a long emotional paragraph. I did not express anger or vindictiveness. I simply channeled the exact same cold corporate energy they had weaponized against me for a decade. I typed out a message and sent it in a group chat to both Gladys and Trent. "I am currently reviewing your request for emergency housing assistance. Unfortunately, my personal financial resources are strictly allocated to my own household and my children. However, I have located a facility that aligns perfectly with your current financial portfolio." I attached a web link to a highly rated establishment called the Starlight Motor Inn. It was a notoriously run-down pay-by-the-hour motel located right off the interstate 30 miles outside the city limits. It was the kind of place that featured flickering neon signs, peeling paint, and a strict cash-only policy. It was the exact opposite of the Beacon Hill mansion they had tried to claim as their own. I typed one final follow-up message to deliver the ultimate payoff. "Gladys, you frequently reminded me that building character requires struggle. Trent, you mentioned just yesterday that people like me need to learn how to stand on our own 2 feet without riding coattails. I completely agree with your brilliant philosophies. Consider this an incredible opportunity to practice the independence you value so highly. I recommend taking the municipal bus to the motel, as Trent no longer has a corporate vehicle. Do not contact this number again." I pressed send and immediately blocked both of their phone numbers. I did not want to hear their apologies, their excuses, or their desperate bargaining. They had made their choices when they decided to worship a fraud. Now they had to live in the reality they helped create. I set my phone down and took a long, satisfying sip of my coffee. The morning sun continued to brighten the kitchen. The television anchor moved on to the local weather forecast. The storm that had ravaged my life for the past year was officially over. Brad was locked in a federal holding facility facing a mountain of insurmountable evidence. Amber was scrambling to trade her testimony for a lighter prison sentence. Gladys and Trent were waiting for a city bus to take them to a cheap motel completely cut off from the wealth they had stolen. I had dismantled the entire toxic hierarchy without lifting a finger in anger. I had used their own greed, their own arrogance, and their own cruel words to build the perfect trap. And now I was entirely free to step into the future I had secured for myself and my children. The wreckage was completely cleared, and the beautiful horizon was finally absolutely spotless. 9 months later, that spotless horizon framed the towering granite columns of the federal courthouse in South Boston. The transition from late autumn to the blistering heat of midsummer mirrored the grueling methodical pace of the federal justice system. I walked up the wide stone steps wearing a tailored slate gray suit. It was the armor of a woman who had survived a hurricane and returned to survey the ultimate damage. Today was the final chapter. Today was Brad's official sentencing hearing. The media circus that initially surrounded the tactical raid on Beacon Hill had faded into a steady, bureaucratic drumbeat of plea deals and asset liquidations. Amber had taken a plea agreement early on, turning state evidence in exchange for a significantly reduced sentence at a minimum security facility. She would serve 3 long years, a very steep price, for a few fleeting months of stolen luxury. Gladys and Trent had completely vanished into the bleak reality of their new cheap motel life, entirely erased from the elite social circles they once desperately clung to. I stepped through the heavy metal detectors and navigated the highly polished corridors of the federal building. The air inside was heavily air-conditioned and smelled faintly of floor wax and impending, unavoidable consequences. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of courtroom number 4 and quietly slipped into the very back row of the public gallery. The wooden pews were mostly empty. There were no eager venture capitalists sitting here today. There were no corrupt politicians or country club neighbors waiting to loudly toast to Brad's unprecedented success. The greedy sycophants who happily drank his expensive champagne had abandoned him the exact second the federal indictments were officially unsealed by the prosecutor. He was now utterly and completely alone. I directed my cold gaze straight toward the defense table. Brad sat slumped forward in a rigid wooden chair. The physical transformation was incredibly jarring. The arrogant, broad-chested corporate titan who used to confidently strut around in $3,000 custom velvet suits was entirely permanently gone. In his place sat a hollow, visibly trembling man wearing an oversized, deeply wrinkled khaki jumpsuit officially issued by the federal holding facility. His hair, once perfectly styled and carefully slicked back every morning, was rapidly thinning and aggressively graying at the temples. He looked easily 10 years older. He looked incredibly small and pathetic. At the prosecution table, Jamal's dedicated colleagues were meticulously organizing their massive stack of physical case files. They had constructed an airtight federal prosecution based entirely on the decrypted 500-page financial ledger I had securely provided to them. They did not even need my direct testimony today. My forensic accounting work spoke loudly for itself, painting a flawless, irrefutable picture of systemic wire fraud, international money laundering, and severe tax evasion. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman with 3 decades of experience handling complex white-collar crime, struck her gavel and called the court to order. She adjusted her silver reading glasses and looked directly down at the massive stack of federal sentencing recommendations. Her rigid expression held absolutely zero sympathy for the defendant. The defense attorney hastily stood up first, launching into a pathetic, deeply desperate plea for judicial leniency. He foolishly tried to paint Brad as an overwhelmed, inexperienced entrepreneur who simply lost track of his rapid corporate expansion. He ridiculously claimed the offshore accounts were just a misguided tax strategy, rather than deliberate malicious financial fraud. He actually dared to verbally mention Brad's children, arguing forcefully that a long prison sentence would unfairly deprive Leo and Mia of their loving father. I sat perfectly still on the wooden bench, my facial expression carved from solid ice. I had already secured permanent sole legal and physical custody of the children many months ago. Brad had not even bothered contesting the family court ruling. He fully knew he had absolutely no legal leverage left. The lead federal prosecutor confidently stepped up to the wooden podium next. He verbally dismantled the defense attorney's incredibly fragile arguments with absolute surgical precision. He highlighted the deliberate, highly calculated nature of the Delaware shell companies. He strongly emphasized the sheer volume of stolen federal tax revenue and the brazen arrogance required to funnel millions of dollars through an intern's digital signature. He firmly reminded the presiding judge that Brad had shown zero genuine remorse during the extensive investigation, only cooperating when he was backed into an inescapable legal corner. The judge turned her piercing, judgmental gaze directly toward the defense table. "Mr. Preston," she said loudly, her voice echoing sharply across the perfectly silent courtroom. "You have the formal opportunity to make a verbal statement before I render my final judicial judgment today." Brad stood up incredibly slowly. His pale hands trembled violently as he gripped the hard edges of the wooden defense table. He looked around the massive empty gallery, his bloodshot eyes frantically searching for anyone who might offer a single shred of human pity. Then his desperate gaze landed squarely on me, sitting quietly in the very back row. He froze completely. His ragged breath hitched audibly in his throat. He absolutely did not expect me to be sitting here. He foolishly thought I would stay far away, perfectly content with my quiet personal victory. Brad swallowed hard and fearfully turned his attention back to the waiting judge. "Your Honor," he begged, his voice cracking pitifully, "I have absolutely nothing left in this world." The judge did not flinch or blink once. "You displayed a staggering level of illegal arrogance," she stated coldly. "I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison without parole." The heavy wooden gavel struck the sounding block with a sharp crack. I stood up smoothly and walked directly out into the blinding sunlight. I pulled my old platinum wedding band from my tailored suit pocket. Without breaking my steady stride, I tossed the metal ring into a nearby trash can. It was over. It was over. 6 months slipped by since that defining afternoon on the courthouse steps, replacing the bitter cold of federal indictments with the warm golden light of a late summer evening. I stood on the expansive wooden deck of my new suburban home, holding a glass of crisp iced tea. I bought this beautiful, sprawling 4-bedroom house in a quiet, highly rated school district entirely on my own. I did not use a single penny of questionable origin. Every brick, every window, and every blade of grass was financed by my immaculate credit score and my legitimate corporate salary. The Beacon Hill mansion had been a cold marble museum built on arrogant lies and massive federal wire fraud. This new house was a genuine sanctuary built on absolute truth. The air smelled of roasting hickory wood and sweet barbecue glaze. Jamal stood comfortably by the massive stainless steel grill, using a pair of silver tongs to expertly flip thick cuts of marinated steak and seasoned vegetables. The brilliant African-American federal prosecutor had completely shed his intimidating courtroom armor for the weekend. He wore a simple gray cotton shirt and casual denim shorts, laughing loudly as he playfully debated grilling techniques with my sister. Jasmine sat nearby on a plush outdoor sofa, her bare feet resting comfortably on the wooden railing. She held a vibrant fruit salad bowl in her lap, tossing a fresh strawberry toward her husband whenever she disagreed with his culinary opinions. The sound of genuine, unfiltered joy echoed from the lush green backyard. Leo, who recently turned 9, was actively demonstrating a new soccer maneuver to his 7-year-old sister Mia. They were chasing a black and white ball across the freshly cut grass, their faces flushed with healthy exertion and bright, innocent happiness. They did not have to tiptoe around a towering, narcissistic father who only used them as convenient props for his fake public image. They did not have to share their safe space with a 24-year-old intern pretending to be their new stepmother. They were simply allowed to be normal, carefree children. I walked down the wooden deck stairs and joined Jasmine on the plush outdoor sofa. She smiled warmly, setting the fruit salad bowl aside to make room for me. "You really found the perfect place, Naomi," she said, gesturing toward the sprawling backyard and the towering oak trees providing deep, comfortable shade. "It feels like a completely different universe compared to that sterile museum Brad forced you to live in. This house actually has a soul." I leaned back against the comfortable cushions, watching Leo successfully score a goal between two plastic orange cones. "It feels incredibly peaceful," I replied smoothly. "I do not have to constantly check my bank accounts for fraudulent transfers. I do not have to worry about federal agents kicking my front doors open in the middle of the night. I just get to sit here and watch my children play in a yard that actually belongs to us." Jamal transferred the perfectly seared steaks onto a large ceramic platter and carried it over to the outdoor dining table. He wiped his hands on a dark apron and flashed a wide, brilliant smile. "I have to admit, Naomi, this backyard barbecue is significantly better than the last party you attended." Jamal joked, his deep voice carrying a tone of playful triumph. "The catering here is much more authentic, and I can confidently guarantee that nobody is going to get hauled away in federal handcuffs before we serve the dessert." Jasmine laughed brightly, reaching out to grab a slice of grilled bell pepper from the platter. "And we do not have to deal with Gladys complaining about the upholstery," she added, taking a deliberate bite, "or Trent trying to network with people while driving a leased car he cannot afford. It is just the five of us. No fake investors, no stolen money, and absolutely no expensive velvet suits." The sheer accuracy of their jokes filled my chest with a profound, resonant warmth. I looked at the table heavily laden with fresh food, and then I looked at the people surrounding it. This was my true family. We did not share the same last name as my ex-husband, but we shared a foundation of absolute loyalty and unwavering support. When Brad tried to financially starve me out and strip me of my dignity, Jasmine and Jamal opened their doors without a single second of hesitation. They gave me a secure fortress to launch my counterattack. They protected my children and championed my professional expertise. They were the family I actively chose, and they were worth far more than any stolen offshore account. "Kids' dinner is ready," I called out across the yard. Leo and Mia immediately abandoned their soccer game and sprinted toward the wooden deck, their sneakers thudding happily against the stairs. They washed their hands at the outdoor sink and scrambled into their seats at the patio table, excitedly talking about their upcoming school projects and weekend sports leagues. I served their plates with generous portions of grilled steak and fresh salad, listening to their vibrant, uninterrupted chatter. We sat around the large wooden table enjoying the delicious meal as the sun began to slowly set behind the towering oak trees. The sky transformed into brilliant shades of orange and purple, casting a warm, protective glow over the entire suburban neighborhood. There were no tense underlying arguments hiding beneath our conversation. There was no pressure to project a flawless image for a room full of wealthy strangers. We just shared stories, laughed at Jamal's terrible jokes, and enjoyed the simple, incredibly profound luxury of a quiet evening. I took a slow sip of my iced tea and looked around the table one more time. Brad was currently sitting in a stark, concrete cell, eating highly processed federal prison food, entirely stripped of the power and control he craved so desperately. He traded his entire future for temporary stolen validation. Meanwhile, I was sitting under a beautiful evening sky, surrounded by genuine love, secure in my wealth, and completely sovereign over my own life. I had weathered the darkest, most terrifying storm he could possibly manufacture, and I had emerged on the other side completely unbroken. The contrast was not just stark, it was the ultimate, irrefutable proof of my total victory. The contrast was not just stark, it was the ultimate, irrefutable proof of my total victory. That profound sense of triumph did not remain confined to the lush green grass of my suburban backyard. It followed me directly into the sleek, high-stakes corporate world I navigated every single morning. When Monday arrived, I traded my comfortable weekend clothes for a tailored charcoal suit that projected absolute, uncompromising authority. I drove my reliable sedan into the underground parking garage of the towering glass skyscraper that housed my prestigious auditing firm. I walked into the main lobby with my head held high, fully prepared to claim the professional recognition I had earned through years of relentless dedication. The fallout from the Preston logistics raid had completely dominated the local and national financial news cycles for months. The business media had aggressively dissected the entire money laundering operation, calling it a masterclass in white-collar deception that was ultimately dismantled by a flawless forensic paper trail. While my name was officially kept out of the federal indictments to protect my civilian status, the elite financial circles of Boston are incredibly small and highly observant. The senior partners at my firm knew exactly who was responsible for deciphering those encrypted offshore ledgers. They recognized the signature precision of my forensic tracking methods. More importantly, they saw how brilliantly I had maneuvered through a highly volatile legal minefield. By securing that ironclad indemnification clause during my divorce, I had expertly shielded myself, and by extension my corporate employers, from any catastrophic collateral damage. As I stepped out of the elevator and onto the executive floor, the usual quiet murmur of the office seemed to pause. Colleagues I had worked alongside for years offered me genuine smiles and firm nods of deep respect. There were no fake pitying glances. There were no whispered rumors about my personal life. They looked at me as a formidable strategist who had successfully outsmarted a massive criminal enterprise without breaking a single law or shedding a single tear. I walked straight to my desk, booted up my computer, and began reviewing my active case files with the same meticulous focus I always applied to my work. Before I could finish my first cup of morning coffee, my desk phone buzzed softly. It was the executive assistant for Harrison, the senior managing partner of the entire firm. She politely requested my immediate presence in the main executive boardroom. I grabbed my leather portfolio, smoothed my jacket, and walked down the long, carpeted hallway. I had sat in dozens of high-pressure boardrooms over the course of my career, but this specific walk felt remarkably different. I was not walking into an ambush. I was walking into a coronation. I pushed open the heavy frosted glass doors of the executive boardroom. The space was massive, featuring a sprawling mahogany table that commanded the center of the room. It was a sharp, poetic parallel to the suffocating law office where Brad had arrogantly demanded my total surrender. But today the atmosphere was entirely positive. Harrison stood at the head of the table, flanked by three other senior partners. They were the titans of the New England financial sector, men and women who demanded absolute perfection and ruthless efficiency from their employees. As I walked into the room, Harrison actually smiled a rare and highly guarded expression. "Take a seat," Naomi Harrison said, gesturing to the plush leather chair directly to his right. "We have been reviewing your quarterly performance metrics, your client retention rates, and your overall strategic value to this firm. But more importantly, we have been closely observing how you handled the highly publicized collapse of your former husband's supply chain company. The level of analytical precision and legal foresight you demonstrated was nothing short of extraordinary. You navigated a potentially devastating public scandal with absolute flawless grace." I sat down, keeping my posture perfectly straight and my expression professionally composed. "I simply applied the exact same forensic principles I use for our corporate clients," I replied smoothly. "I identified a massive systemic liability. I isolated the corrupted assets, and I legally severed the healthy entities from the impending collapse. It was just basic risk management." A female partner sitting across the table let out a sharp, appreciative laugh. "Basic risk management does not usually result in the complete dismantling of an international money laundering syndicate," she noted warmly. "Your reputation in the financial district has skyrocketed, Naomi. We have received dozens of inquiries from high net worth individuals and massive corporate entities who specifically want to retain your services. They want the forensic accountant who successfully outmaneuvered a federal fraud ring. You have become a highly coveted asset. Harrison leaned forward, resting his hands on the polished mahogany table. He looked at me with deep, unwavering respect. You have outgrown your current title, Naomi. You do not just audit numbers anymore. You dictate the entire strategic direction of our fraud division. We do not want to risk losing a talent of your caliber to a rival firm. Therefore, the executive board has voted unanimously this morning. We are formally offering you a position as a full partner at this firm. Harrison slid a thick, beautifully bound legal document across the table. It was a partnership agreement. I looked down at the crisp white pages. This contract did not contain any hidden traps. It did not contain any manipulative indemnification clauses designed to steal my wealth. It was a genuine legally binding offer of corporate equity, profit sharing, and absolute professional authority. I had spent my entire marriage listening to Brad call me a boring bean counter. He told his wealthy friends that I was riding his coattails. He told his young intern that I was holding him back from achieving greatness. Now Brad was earning exactly 12 cents an hour scrubbing cafeteria trays in a federal penitentiary. Meanwhile, I was sitting in an executive boardroom being handed an ownership stake in one of the most powerful financial institutions on the East Coast. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out my favorite silver pen. I did not need to consult a panicked lawyer. I did not need to second-guess my worth. I flipped to the signature page and signed my name with bold, confident strokes. "Welcome to the partnership," Naomi Harrison said, reaching across the table to shake my hand firmly. "Your new corner office is currently being prepped. We expect you to take full command of the investigative division by Monday morning." I shook his hand, feeling a profound surge of hard-earned pride radiating through my entire body. I spent the rest of the day transitioning my files and accepting the enthusiastic congratulations of my peers. When I finally walked into my new corner office, I stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out over the Boston skyline. The city looked beautiful, vibrant, and completely open to endless possibilities. I had successfully transformed the darkest, most terrifying period of my life into a brilliant, undeniable triumph. I had built a new empire, and this one was completely, flawlessly mine. Standing in that corner office looking out over the Boston skyline, I finally understood the true currency of power. For years, I believed that power meant fighting back. I thought it meant matching Brad word for word, argument for argument. Society conditions us to believe that when we are wronged, we must scream for justice. We are taught to throw plates, to weep, to demand apologies from people who are fundamentally incapable of giving them. Brad desperately wanted that exact emotional reaction from me. He wanted me to fall to my knees in that sterile conference room and beg him to keep our family together. He wanted my devastation to serve as the ultimate monument to his massive ego. But I denied him that satisfaction. I gave him absolute, chilling silence instead. Silence is not weakness. Silence is the most terrifying weapon you can wield against a narcissist. When you stop reacting, you entirely deprive them of their primary fuel source. Brad did not know how to process a woman who simply looked at his threats and smiled. My silence gave me the crucial space I needed to analyze the battlefield. It allowed me to decrypt his ledgers, secure my offshore accounts, and arrange my children's safety without him ever noticing my movements. While he was busy shouting from the rooftops about his immense wealth and his shiny new intern, I was quietly mapping the structural flaws in his glass house. Setting boundaries is often misunderstood as simply saying no to toxic people. But real boundaries are much deeper than that. Real boundaries are tangible, actionable walls that protect your peace, your assets, and your future. Sometimes setting a boundary means making a deeply calculated sacrifice. I had to let go of a $2.5 million mansion that I loved. I had to walk away from a logistics company that my own credit score had helped build. I had to pack my life into suitcases and sleep in a modest guest bedroom while my ex-husband flaunted his stolen victory. Most people would view that as a devastating loss, but I viewed it as the cost of admission to my new life. I gladly paid that price because I understood the stark difference between a temporary setback and a permanent trap. By signing that divorce decree, I did not surrender. I severed a diseased limb to save the rest of my body. I legally forced Brad to carry the entire weight of his own toxic choices. I built a financial and legal firewall so thick that not even a federal raid could breach it. You have to be willing to lose the things that do not truly serve you in order to protect the things that actually matter. My peace of mind, my children's safety, and my professional integrity were worth infinitely more than a velvet sofa or a Beacon Hill address. There is a profound, almost poetic beauty in letting a narcissist dig their own grave. People like Brad operate under the dangerous delusion that they are the smartest person in every single room. They believe rules, laws, and basic human decency simply do not apply to them. They construct elaborate, glittering facades built entirely on manipulation and theft, and they genuinely believe they will never face the consequences. You do not need to actively destroy a person like that. You just need to step out of their way and hand them a very large shovel. Brad's absolute downfall was not caused by my anonymous tip to the federal government. His downfall was caused by his own insatiable, unyielding greed. If he had been willing to split our assets fairly in the divorce, if he had not been so utterly consumed by the need to leave me penniless and humiliated, I would have been legally tethered to his sinking ship. I would have been forced to help him navigate the federal fallout to save my own skin. But his arrogance blinded him. His desperate need to possess 100% of the company was the exact mechanism that triggered his federal indictment and my complete immunity. He weaponized his own legal team to draft the exact document that saved my life and ruined his. I did not ruin Brad. Brad ruined Brad. I simply watched him do it. As I sat down at my new executive desk, I felt a deep, resonant gratitude for every single hardship I had endured over the past year. The betrayal, the financial blackout, the cruel taunts from my former in-laws, they had all served a vital purpose. They burned away my remaining illusions and forged me into a woman who could never be manipulated again. I transformed from a wife who quietly tolerated disrespect into a formidable corporate partner who dictates her own terms. I also realized the immense value of the people who truly stood by me. Jasmine and Jamal did not just offer me a guest bedroom, they offered me a sanctuary of absolute truth and fierce protection when I needed it most. Their unwavering support reminded me that blood does not always define loyalty. My children are thriving in a peaceful, secure environment, surrounded by the genuine love of the family I actively chose for myself. They will grow up watching their mother lead with intelligence, grace, and absolute boundaries. They will never have to learn how to shrink themselves to accommodate a fragile, toxic ego. The storm is completely behind us and the future is incredibly bright. The most dangerous enemy is never the one who screams threats in your face. The most dangerous enemy is the one who calmly smiles, signs the paper you slide across the table, and quietly walks away, knowing you just handed them the keys to your destruction. Sometimes the absolute sweetest revenge is simply giving a toxic person exactly what they demand and letting them drown in it. Have you ever found yourself dealing with a narcissist who thought they had you completely trapped? Have you ever chosen to walk away in silence and let karma do the heavy lifting for you? I would love to hear your stories and your strategies in the comments below. We all have moments where we are forced to choose between fighting a losing battle or stepping aside to let the trash take itself out. Share your experiences with me. And if this story resonated with you, if you felt the profound satisfaction of watching a bully orchestrate their own spectacular downfall, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I have many more stories to share about navigating toxic dynamics, setting unbreakable boundaries, and reclaiming your personal power. Thank you so much for listening to my journey today. Remember to protect your peace, trust your own brilliance, and never let anyone convince you that your silence is a sign of weakness. The story of Naomi and Brad offers a profound masterclass in the quiet, undeniable power of restraint. In a society that constantly tells us we must scream to be heard and fight back aggressively when we are wronged, Naomi's journey teaches us a completely different lesson. True power often lies in absolute silence. When confronted by a narcissistic partner intent on destruction and humiliation, her refusal to engage in the chaotic emotional battle he desperately wanted became her greatest weapon. Narcissists thrive on reactions. They build their egos by feeding off the devastation, anger, and panic of their targets. By maintaining her composure and calmly signing the divorce papers that Brad arrogantly assumed were his ultimate victory, Naomi denied him the very fuel he needed to feel superior. Instead of fighting a draining public battle over a toxic marriage and stolen wealth, she strategically stepped aside. She allowed his own greed, carelessness, and massive ego to become the architects of his federal downfall. She proved that you do not need to lower yourself to your abuser's level to achieve justice. Sometimes you simply need to hand them the shovel and let them dig their own grave. Furthermore, the narrative beautifully illustrates that setting firm boundaries often requires sacrificing the superficial to protect the essential. Naomi walked away from a multi-million-dollar mansion and her own company, understanding that surrendering those assets was the necessary price for her legal immunity, safety, and personal freedom. Her story is a testament to the fact that true wealth is not measured in luxury cars or sprawling estates, but in peace of mind, untarnished integrity, and the genuine support of a chosen family. If you have ever had to quietly walk away from a toxic situation to protect your peace, share your story in the comments below